All right. Hey, team. Thank you so much for jumping on in. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that we've got the sort of default home content here when everyone else arrives. All right, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining today. I think we've got a few folks trickling in. Can everybody hear me okay, just to start? Wonderful. All right. Thank you so much. So my name is Evan McMullen, and I'm joined here today by a motley crew of excited folks who are hyped to talk about the Global Registry. So to set the stage for this conversation, I'm going to share some of the slides that we have prepared today. Those are easily accessible for your own review on Quigo Chat. But just so we can all have a shared frame of reference, I'm going to go ahead and pop this up here. So for those who are presenting, forgive me for the clumsy nature of our sharing today. I'm just going to ask you to tell me when to click to the next slide, because I think hopping around a host is going to be challenging, but let's dive on in. So today we've got a variety of guest speakers who will be lending their voice to this conversation. I think some of them have been in a few of the other sessions, but this is a joint effort from a number of folks at Consensus, Kale, who is with us from Microsoft, and we have been doing a lot of the sort of heavy lifting to extrapolate learnings from much of the amazing work done by the community already to this point, and then to start to apply some of those thoughts so we can get to a solution form that we can all discuss as a community. So our agenda for today reflects the content that was shared on Quigo Chat before, but just to revisit, we're going to take a little break in the middle so that we're not too global phone booked out, but we're going to start by framing up this challenge that we have, just defining it in a way that we can all wrap our heads around and validating that definition, making sure that we haven't forgotten anything. And we'll take a little breather to digest that information. And when we return, we'll talk about applying that, that approach and that sort of set of concepts to this a more tangible fashion. So focusing on references to not only the actual tooling that we can use to bring this about, but also precedents in the market of similar challenges and offer us a unique model that we can learn from and even mimic. And this conversation will lead into our open Q&A. We've got a few questions to start with, but always open to more. And then beyond that, would love for this conversation to move into ideas that we could hack on together and ways that we could continue to collaborate as a community after we leave one another's presence here this week. So as always, I will do my very best to monitor the chat, but if I miss something in there, please feel free to raise your hand, jump on in. This is intended to be an information sharing session. So we're going to do a little bit of talking at first just to get it all out there, but we invite everybody to participate in this discussion and make sure those are heard. So without further ado, let me set the table a little bit. So for those of you who you probably have seen this, this little screenshot from GitHub describing the basis challenge. So as many familiar with baselining may know, it takes, baselining is not a single player game. You need a party to engage with, to exchange data with, to maintain consensus among multiple disparate, often disparately legally held data sets. And so in order to tackle this challenge, we not only need to appreciate what is the role of this registry in the mere existence of baselining as a function, but then also what is the role of onboarding, because this phone book is likely to be the first touch point, the first interaction that that enterprises have with the baseline community, especially as new ones are invited in. And so we are hoping to use this session to, as I mentioned, validate some of the understanding that we have achieved thus far, arrive at a sort of a shared comprehension of what this challenge presents, and then to begin actually ideating around how we could define a solution. The objective laid forth in this GitHub page is 2021 for a mainnet solution, and we love a good urgency. And so without further ado, I will hand it over to my colleague Italo to describe this problem in greater detail.
Yeah. Hi all. Thank you for joining to the discussion. I'll try to level the expectations and explain the problem that we are here to solve, and also share some terminologies that we've been using in our discussions so far, and also try to cover some of the main concepts and challenges that we are facing in these discussions. Okay, the problem we are dealing with is not something new, but also there's no bulletproof solution considering all the distinct aspects that we see in the requirements in problems like this. The global phone book is a request from the baseline community in order to solve this root problem that basically is to facilitate the creation of baselined workflows by, I would say, easily discovering the counterparty's attributes that are necessary to set up the work groups. Like Evan said, the problem is described by John Wolpert in this GitHub issue number 133, and who is not aware of that, I suggest to read when we have a break, the 5 minutes break. It's very quick. But the description is simple, and it takes in consideration not only technical details and challenges that I believe most of us here in this audience know, but also it covers the non-functional requirements, like I think we have this strong wish to have the solution running by 2021. And of course, we need to have something that can be easily adopted by the community. So these type of requirements are strong as well. And maybe we need to talk not only about technical and perfect solutions, but we need to have some level and be aware about these wishes as well, right? So I will recap a bit of what is described in this issue, and step back a little bit in the concepts, because it touches some solutions and suggestions for solutions as well. So just to explain the problem, every baselined workflow needs to know what counterparties are allowed to sign a work step. And these counterparties are defined by a set that we call work group, and that is defined by a smart contract called org registry that contains this set of attributes from the counterparties involved. But this is something that's being done manually, right? And it has the downside, like John mentioned it, to require the counterparty education and to load the organizational setup for have each time you want to develop a workflow, right? So the phone book is the idea that should solve this issue by making counterparties and their attributes that are needed to create and deploy these smart contracts discoverable in an easy way, reusable, and of course trustable. So the idea is to have something public, like in Yellow Pages, just to simplify. Um, but of course, we can discuss any other type of solution. I believe that John suggested something like the Yellow Pages to simplify that and accelerate the adoption, right? So we can think that the phone book also can be extended to bring more information, not only the information needed to set up and work group, but I believe that it's better to keep it simple right now. So I asked us to focus in these attributes that we need for setting up a baseline workflow that is the public keys, the zero knowledge public keys, and the communication endpoints. Of course, linked to an organization, right? I think you can change to the next slide. Yeah.
Oh.
So, yeah. So to implement a solution that solves such problem, we need to consider some aspects, right? We need to discuss governance and security on an enterprise level. We need to decide if we will have some entity elected to be the host of the phone book. Of course, it will bring some responsibilities to that host. And we haven't discussed it much that, but there's a case where we can not have the central host as well, right? So we can be discussing solutions that offer ways to verify each entry of this catalog without the need to trust in this a central entity, this host of the phone book, right? We need also to remember the importance of standards. We know, I think that most here in the audience know the W3C standards for deeds and VCs that are getting more popular, and they can play a good role to solve not only this solution, but maybe bring further more features that can be used in the baseline protocol. So we need to pay attention to that. And most important, like I mentioned before, the requirements with time and remember all the time the needs from the community, right? I'm a newbie in this community, so maybe during the presentation I will not cover everything that is required, but yeah, I think we are here to learn and discuss that. Can you go to the next one, please, Evans? Yeah. So I make these illustrations just to represent the components that we are dealing in this problem and to see the solution in more concrete. I'm calling host the service. It can be an API, it can be an enterprise cloud provider, a website. It's the place where the phone book will be stored, basically, right? And we are talking about a central host because in the issue it came as a yellow page, but I don't think we should get stick to that. Of course, it's a good requirement in my opinion. And the phone book itself is something that should be public, so you can discover other counterparties without the need of reaching them directly. Preferably, I think it should be populated by the companies itself and not by a central issuer, but it's a personal opinion, right? We can talk about that. But we need to guarantee that the entries in this catalog are trustable. And in my opinion, they should be verifiable. So if in some case this host is hacked you should have a way of guaranteeing that the data that you are getting from it can be verified in another way, right? Can you jump to the next one, please? So we've been also using the term administrator to reference to the person that is responsible for setting up and workflow and for onboarding and organization to the phone book. Basically, we've been discussing as well how this person proves that they can represent that organization. So we've been discussing about things that we've been using to see, like proving that I own some domain by changing DNS entries, adding resource to that website. We talked about users in Azure that have some privilege, and also the use of VCs for reputations. And we need as well to remember that we need to guarantee that the public key and endpoint for the communication endpoint for the baseline protocol belong to that organization. So when we discuss about that, we discuss about signing documents that prove that, handshakes between using communication endpoints and well-known URIs. And basically, this is what we've been discussing so far. When I say so far, it's not a long time ago, guys. It's just 1 week ago. So it's something very new. But of course, we in the identity team at Consensus, we've been discussing similar issues for a long time. I think that it's enough, at least to level things. And I hope that this explanation is enough to frame the problem and terminologies that we will be using. And now I hand over to Johnny, who will recap the UX sessions we had with some members of the baseline community.
Great. Hey, everybody. Let's see here. Evan, are you in control of the slides?
I am.
Okay. Let's jump to the next one. I think it should be a screenshot of the Miro. Okay.
Oh, wait,
so,
I think it's...
Yeah, right.
Do you want me to pull up the full Miro, or is this good? This works?
Yeah, if we can pull up the full Miro. I had added
there was a link there at one point. Hang on, give me a quick second, guys.
Sure. I'll frame this up in the meantime. So
Okay.
What we did in some of our first meetings with the baseline team, the identity team and baseline team, and also Kale for Microsoft getting together, was we wanted to map out what the experience was of interacting with this phone book for, a real person at a company somewhere trying to verify the identity of another company. How do we, what it might look like to actually click the buttons that get you onto the interface of the phone book. And just really what we came up with there, which I'll walk you through, is relatively simple. Probably looks like a lot of flows that we've all been through before. But I think the value here is the fact that we all have a shared sense of what needs to happen at a basic level. The thing that it also does is help us raise and see the gaps in the technical side of things that we need to solve to bring this experience to life. And so we kind of mapped out two different our participants. We have, a company Y who needs to join the phone book, and an Acme company who's already on the phone book, and they need to identify company Y and pull down the relevant information from the phone book so that they can start doing baseline stuff with them. Let's see.
Sorry, Johnny, give me 1 second. I just wanted to pull up those post-its while you were referring to them. I got opted out, so I just have to sign back into Miro. Give me 1 second, guys. Sorry.
Okay. And then the other point, I guess, around why this is, or to frame what the output of this UX session is, that I think it's intended to be descriptive of just the work that we had done first, our first iteration of thinking through this, and not a proclamation of the future of what should be built. I think that'll come out of a lot of the discussions later in the session. There's competing ideas that might alter this experience based on other technical decisions. But just to bring everybody up to speed on what the team has been doing and the way that we have been thinking about it, we'll just recap it quickly here.
So Johnny, tell me how you want to maneuver through
Sure.
this real estate.
Yeah, you're good right now. So,
Cool.
So here we can see that company Y is, intending to join the baseline registry so that they can be found by other potential partners. And so they would receive an email invite link, potentially, from somebody already on the baseline registry that would like to work with them via baseline, and they need to get them on the registry first just to make future interactions more seamless. So they receive that, they go to baselineprotocol.org and sign up. We've also thought about how this might be integrated natively into something like a identity cloud provider, like an Azure, where these joining could be directly from inside of that interface. But setting that aside, you could go to baselineprotocol.org and set and sign up that way with a unique invite link. You log in potentially using your enterprise identity provider. You consent to some of the information that is stored with your identity provider being transferred over to the directory, which is very similar, our classic OAuth style consent. And then this is created, the registry that people will see is created, or your actual listing in the registry is created dynamically from that info. They can review this and approve it to make sure that there isn't any sensitive information that's going to show up in this listing. They simply click approve, and that's how easy we imagine it could be if we rely specifically on these enterprise identity providers. I know that we'll talk later about an alternate flow that doesn't rely so heavily on that. But for now, what we talked about was this version of the UX. So now, Evan, if you can go to bottom right. Yeah. So for a company who would like to find somebody else on the registry, we imagined Acme Company. They want to add company Y to their baseline workflow so they can assign them these work steps. And so they need a couple of things from this counterparty, which is they need, whether that's the zero knowledge, the public key, the communication endpoint, or any other details that is going to facilitate the baseline stuff you want to do. So, we imagine it's, some procurement manager at Acme Company tells an IT manager to add company Y to the work group, right? So they're going to go to baselineregistry.com. They're just going to simply search for company Y. They're going to open and view company Y's profile or their listing. And then one of the open questions I think for us to discuss, and that Italo I think referenced in the setup, is they need to see this proof that company Y is the company Y that they think it is, whether that is a proof that they are in control of company-y.com, leveraging DNS or something, or some other proof, but that needs to be displayed to give our users reassurance, and it needs to be interrogatable in that they can click on that signal of trust and verify it themselves independently if they wanted, right? And this could be proved by Azure, right? That could be the root of trust backstop, or it could be DNS, or it could be something else that I think we'll talk about. But the interface needs to display that, and then once that trust is established via that symbol, they can copy company-wise stuff confidently into however they're handling all of their baseline actions. And that is really all that needs to happen from a first pass of for the UX. So all the technical things that come together, we think need to start facilitating this general flow. Granted, some of it might need to change, but this was our first pass. So just wanted to bring everybody up to speed on our first go round in imagining how this comes to life. So with that, I think that took a lot less than the 10 minutes I was slotted for. But I'll pass it back to you, Evan, if we have a break or if we just want to power through.
Sure. So actually, I think this would be a logical point for us to pause and invite some questions, comments from our teammates here in the room, because we've performed this this mapping thus far, as Johnny described, by speaking to a few folks, to sort of by studying the artifacts that exist preceding this effort. But let's interrogate this in real time. So do we have any challenges to the assumptions that Johnny just described with respect to how we would assume enterprises might onboard or seek to join the baseline? Does that feel like, and actually here, let me put this process back up on screen so we can look at it, but just sort of by a show of digital hands. Is anyone feeling scared by this? Is anyone feeling like this is foreign? This doesn't look familiar to me? All right, so we've got no fear thus far, which is great. That's a really wonderful sign. Does anyone want to add anything? Do we feel like we might be missing any essential steps or considerations? Or if you're the owner of your small enterprise and you want a baseline, does this flow of steps, does that look fairly complete to make you feel good about this process? We want to put ourselves in the shoes of a young upstart company excited to join the baseline and ready to get on board. What's going to happen on their side?
I actually have a question, if you guys can hear me.
Oh yeah, Jake, what's going on? What you thinking?
So at the end of this process, like, this setup seems fairly straightforward. In the Phonebook concept, on the other side of this, do you see the systems that are baseline on the other side? So I'm thinking in terms of like big enterprise to big enterprise that has multiple systems at the tail end step. And do I see a directory of all the baseline systems that are available to me on the other side of that?
Do you think that you'll need to? If it's useful to query, because it typically you would think, like, let's put ourselves in the seat of that party. That party probably has a counterparty in mind. They're probably, not just like surfing the available profiles, like looking for a date to see who's available, However, it might be a source of collaboration, inspiration, but probably won't be its chief role.
Yeah, no, I guess I'm thinking of more, and I brought this up, but more the enterprises I deal with buy other big businesses. And so it's almost like a fast way to integrate, I would say, business data on somebody that acquires another company relatively fast. So it's a much softer handoff, right? It's not a big like discovery process. It's we acquired another company and we want to integrate data faster than traditionally as possible. And I see that being an easier path in at some of these big organizations at first is, they have a vested interest in the companies that are coming online with us.
Jake, what an elegant observation. That really mirrors something that I heard in the earlier session on the baseline experience that Daniel Norkin was saying about, considering what are the sort of essential use cases where such functions occur in the wild already. And there was sort of a silly show of hands, okay, who's had 2 laptops in one room and you just use email to get stuff from one to the other? Like everyone sheepishly, like, yeah, I did that this morning. And so I think what you've observed here is another organic setting where such demand occurs. And the effort and cost of integration is cumbersome. It's usually farmed out to some other organization, or it's like an excruciating blocker to acquisition and team integration. So I think that is an awesome driver of business requirements. And as you described, the terms are a little gentler because it's sort of all in the same house. So maybe a little bit different than some of these more sort of cross-border exchanges that we're talking about.
I think one of the big questions is, this is, I think, for like a small company, I think a pretty like easy, workable, I think, approach. the question is like, once you're not anymore the same person, like, okay, I'm the person who's doing whatever, I want to do something. I'm a developer at a big organization. I want to do that. Like, who's now the authority in the organization to actually do certain things? And then it gets a little bit more complicated, because then I'm a developer in department A. I don't control the website or the DNS entry. I don't. So that's why I'm saying that this gets fast very complicated, depending on like what we're aiming for as like an MVP. The second thing is, I think even organizations have like 10 different names. I mean, like whatever, Deloitte UK, blah, blah, blah. And then who is actually the right counterparty I'm interacting with on a legal side, rather than, oh, the title sounds right, or Deloitte.com. They have like, I don't know. So this is, I think, if we can narrow down our scope for an MVP and like accepting certain of these limitations, I think it will help us to say, we know it's way more complex, but for MVP, we are accepting this if we can.
Yeah, Reuben, I got to agree. I mean, this is kind of why, I've been taking this sort of get her done approach, as people have been hearing me say. And, to me, one way to do that, and the nice thing about having 25 people and a lot more now online, looking at, what they say in open source, all bugs, with enough eyeballs, all bugs are trivial. Well, all ideas can be fully fleshed out with enough eyeballs as well. And so, an opening gambit has been, let's just restrict it at first to cloud providers and authenticating through that, because they've already they've already nailed that issue, right? You've already, if you're on Azure or GCP, you already have your master account run by so if you're General Electric, or I'm just picking a name, and you have an Azure account, your head of IT is fully in control of that account. And if you're a department in that company, you've had to go through them to get your instance of Azure or GCP. So they've already got that level of organizational access controls. I don't know if Jonathan Levy's in here right now, but Jonathan, as you know, Reuven, is a genius with this stuff, right down to the user level, right? So this interface, this connection point between sort of the yellow pages entry of the company's sort of front facing, here are my interfaces, and here's my interface, here's my org registry entry, here's my account ID. I don't know if we've gone through why account IDs or accounts, Ethereum accounts in the registry won't lead people to finding your identity out, right? Or your activity, because that's not the account that's going to be used for actually signing transactions. But yeah, I need your account ID. I need your endpoints. That's the yellow pages entry. But then what happens all behind the scenes in terms of permissioning, in terms of user management, in terms of organization? I don't want to just interact with Coke. I want to interact with the Coke purchasing department in this one division, right? So how does that all get managed? And I should think the easiest or more nothing's easy, but most straightforward way to go about that is, and pragmatic, to just get the thing done, is to just say, anything on the on the phone book has to have come from one of a number of cloud business accounts. But that's not so I say that partly to instigate argument. Right? So maybe somebody would say, so let me just prompt, I'd make my day to have somebody say, yeah, that's adorable, John, but that's not the right, there's actually a way better way of doing it. I heard you, these are the issues. Let's do it this way. And that would be great. But that's kind of my opening gambit.
I think it's incredibly valid. I mean, enterprise is very slow to change in the first place, and you freak them out with giving out too much control too wide, too quick. So I think it's got to come from the highest level and then almost be pushed down and disseminated at that point to make them feel confident in the first place. I mean, you're already asking these organizations to take a big leap into this kind of new world of things, and you've got to make it as less scary as you possibly can to the IT side of the house.
Hey guys, I have a quick question to add to the authentication piece. So using an existing cloud account for, let's say, for Coca-Cola, what do y'all think about the benefits of associating that with a DID identity, where we could use that for on-chain permissioning, where okay, this set of whitelisted DIDs for Coca-Cola are the only DIDs that can edit this specific area of the phone book and change that data. And you could also, if you wanted to issue permissions that way. I know we've got Johnny on the call that's worked on UPort, so I just want to see what y'all thought about adding that to this.
Yeah, how would we do it? I mean, let's that's what this is all about. There's a lot of people in this room, but maybe some folks that really want to get into that. Johnny, they could just go into another room, bang it out. You could be the inventors of that thing.
Wait for it. It's coming soon. The slides to come.
Yeah, I love the energy and questions, guys. And so I guess that answers what I was about to pose to the group was, does everyone feel like we need a break? We've been here for a little while, or do we want to power through? I get the sense that we've got a lot of energy for this. So let's
got 27 more hours to go there, Evan.
All right. Exactly. So we're almost done. We have to hurry.
It's a sprint.
I will say, by the way, that try to make sure that empower the people that are coming in that might come in hours later than this. Make sure to leave behind breadcrumbs and yeah, like work items. I am looking for about 8 bountyable issues. So it'd be very cool if at the end of Friday if we said, yeah, we've got 2 phone book issues that we can get hackers onto in December.
Absolutely, John. That is our objective for the last 30 minutes of this meeting here today, is to suss out those prompts from the questions that we've got. But what I will do next is share that little teaser that Reuven was describing with respect to how we might engage this in a more practical sense. So we can take a little breather when folks feel like it. Please hit me up in the chat, raise your hand, tell me you're bored, interrupt me. But let's just make sure we're all on the same wavelength here. But to some solution, start off discussing what that sort of first response centralized solution might look like, starting the discussion with Azure that Kale's going to lead us in. And then after that, Reuven is going to lead us through some solution references that we might look to precedent to educate ourselves on best practices. And then Oliver is going to discuss a little bit more about DIDs and VCs, and we're going to get into that solution proposal. So Kale, would you like to discuss solving the problem with Azure to start?
Yeah, sure. So it's probably like a bad title, solving the problem with Azure. I think Azure.
I'll change it on the fly.
Yeah, I think Azure can help here, right? I don't think it can solve the whole problem, obviously. I think Azure and clouds in general have some sort of a validation, as John was mentioning earlier, that's already been kind of done to onboard people. So for instance, with an Azure Active Directory tenant, typically, if someone's running that in a large enterprise, they're also tying their domain name to it, right? And in order to do that, they have to prove to us that they own that domain, which is the traditional, drop a record over here in your DNS. That will prove that you had admin rights to actually change that. And as a result of that, now I can trust that you actually own that domain. So I'll use that binding. And so you can have your email and all that kind of stuff come through that domain. So that's like traditional like DNS kind of proofing, which is really cool, right? I think that's something we can use. And I think what we were ideating on was, is there a way for us to kind of expose that? And some had brought up on some of the offline calls we had is, could we approach it from the cloud side to start with, right? So if I'm in an enterprise business, I'm new to Baseline, but I'm familiar with my cloud because I have a bunch of stuff running up there. Then maybe I could approach it from that angle and I feel more comfortable then. So I'm going to my IT pro guy who says, yes, what do you need me to do? Oh, we're going to do this thing with Baseline. We need to register in this phone book. It requires us to do XYZ. We've been calling this fictitious button or whatever this would exist here inside of Azure that would allow you to basically say, yes, register in the phone book for me. How that gets implemented, I think that's something we should talk about a little bit. I've got some ideas around that, but I'd love to hear other people's, ideas. And again, I'm talking about Azure, but this applies, to GCP or AWS very much in the same way. So I think the core principles here are, can we have people who are already using Azure or Dynamics or some other business system that's already in the cloud and be able to initiate the process from there? Maybe a counter, we also have a website. I feel like the website thing, at least from my angle, and I've been kind of talking around inside some business groups inside Microsoft about this, that's a little harder to sell, right? Especially to a large enterprise. And if we're going to do a B2B connection with someone, we have to have some strong assurance that that person we're talking to on the other side is the right person. As I think Sophie brought up in the chat window there, same thing. Like, hey, if I'm saying, hey, I'm working with Samsung, is this the right Samsung? Is this, if I'm working with GE, is this the right GE? Those kind of things. So I think some of this could do that, but I feel like, and also to comment on one of the other things that come up there earlier around centralized versus decentralized for how this gets started. I certainly don't think this is the end, right? To say, hey, if we have this thing that kicks off from Azure, that's awesome. That's what we should just keep using. I think maybe it's a good start, and we can build on that, right? And maybe get it more decentralized as we go. But as is typical, I think with enterprises, start with something that's familiar, which traditionally has been centralized systems, and bring yourself over to that decentralized side, slowly, so that companies have time to adjust and learn how this stuff works, so that they don't get scared or too much friction, or they pull back from there. So from a high level, I think that's what we're looking for, is maybe build some ideas I was thinking about. We can talk about this later. Was maybe some serverless components that could run as part or inside of your Azure infrastructure that would link up to your Azure AD, that allows your IT pro to basically push the button to register you. The elements that go over there, I think it's very small right now. It's like the organization name, there's a public key and something else. But those things, maybe some of that data can even come directly from Azure AD. So nobody's like rekeying anything in. Stuff is just happening there on that side. Again, just to provide a comfortable place for people to onboard. I'll pause for a second. I've been talking for a bit here for people to throw mud at me or say that's cool or anything.
I gotta say that's the hardest thing. One of the things we're trying to push on with this whole summit is to make a super safe place for people to just get verbose, because Zoom calls, I'm sure we all experienced for the last 8 months. Just it's like pulling teeth to get that kind, even in a real world room. It's hard to get people to just jump in and go, hey, wait a minute. So Jake, kudos to you for jumping in. Hopefully, and Sophie did on the chat, which is totally a great way of doing it.
Yeah, I think everything he said was spot on. It's not probably the end solution right off the bat, but it's the easiest path forward, I think, for these. I've all dealt with is big enterprise clients for the last 20 years. And I know the fear factor in doing some of this stuff, and being in the Microsoft space, especially. Every single client I have will understand exactly what he just said right away. And at least you can knock that off and then start, moving over to some of this stuff.
Forgive me because I'm like trying to make sure that all 8 tracks don't crash and burn at once. By the way, thanks, Kel. So if you mentioned this, what would be what is the most simple, minimally viable way of getting of taking the notion that Kirk mentioned about a DID and generating it out of an Azure account in such a way that we would have, like, by the end of the year, the first baseline Phonebook entry that would be compliant with that idea? And what would that look like? Can we write an issue?
Yeah, I think so. I think the question, and again, we've been having a bunch of discussions, even side conversation. I've been talking to others, Kyle and a bunch of people on the team. But one of the things we've been thinking about is like this root of trust, right? That's going to come back here. So registering, the mechanics of how to register, I think maybe what John was saying there, like that's one thing we can definitely put in an issue and say, how can we functionally make this work? Like, can we create a DID from an Azure AD tenant and have some assurance like where that thing came from? I think, yeah, we can write that up, and I think that's doable. I think the question, though, it starts to come back to, though, is like how much trust do we need to put? Like, I don't think Microsoft should be the issuer for everything that happens in the global phone book. They could be one maybe, and maybe it's not.
Well, if you do it, then
corporate.
you'll make everybody else jealous. And as long as we've abstracted and generalized it, then they can hop in when you start taking the cake there.
Yeah. Maybe it's that chicken and egg thing, right? It's like, hey, we'll stand up something here and provide some assurance, programmatically that makes sure that people can trust that piece. But then, like, where does that go from there? Like, how do we adapt that to others? Maybe that kind of naturally happens. I also feel like, and this is getting a little bit outside the Azure stuff, but to speak to like the evolution of how this would work, maybe the initial thing is, hey, we have this way to prove some stuff from Azure that gives us a base, right? Like to start with, and then we can start layering stuff on top of it. Like maybe you have to get 3 of 5 to also like sign something around this or something like that to give you even more assurance, and we can start layering those things on. Maybe that's an approach. That's what I've been thinking about, to like, just like with network security, right? We just had to keep adding layers to provide a more secure solution. We can do the same thing here, right? We'll just keep adding layers to that to give people the comfort that they're actually talking to the right guy on the other side of the wire.
Kirk, absolutely. And just really quickly, Ruben, just to hop in here to respond to a question from Justin here in the chat. Justin, is a great question. What additional layers of trust do we have beyond that initial validation? I think that's exactly what Kirk was describing, is how do we first lay that initial foundation with Azure or another enterprise provider identity, but then have additional layers to ensure that that trusted relationship extends beyond the keyboard to the parties that are actually interacting. And so there are a number of ways that have been suggested to do that thus far. So in Slack, we saw some awesome questions from, I think it was Juan Blanco was suggesting, what if we have attestations to VCs to give them additional oomph, like a +1 or a seconded on Slack, kind of from other entities. So that's a great question to raise. And I think it exactly dovetails with what Kirk was suggesting is, after we establish that initial layer of proven feasibility, what are the other components of trust that are, both provable and meaningful for our audience? But yes, Ruben, sorry, go ahead.
I think we're dancing around lots of ideas and proposals we already have. So maybe
yes.
I'm doing like the 3-minute version, and let Oliver give a chance to say, and then we can talk about this, because we have, I think, lots of answers and nobody says them because we then kind of like don't want to jump.
We haven't gotten to the slide yet.
Exactly. So can I just use the screen? I just want to show 1 or 2
Oh,
things.
please. Yes, absolutely.
Let's not lose that one from Justin. Maybe get that in the notes. And again, we got 23 hours left, so we can go all into that.
Yes, Johnny's doing an awesome job of making sure that we document everything from these comments, the comments that are on Slack, on YouTube. So totally hear you, John. And we are ensuring that those are put into our workflow, not only for sort of homework after today, but also for tomorrow. So we got you.
So awesome.
Cool. You need to give me the right to share.
Oh, sorry, Ruben. Now that we've got you here, okay, cool. You have the permissions. We're good.
Yeah. So I think what I'm just trying to, I think we mentioned DNS, and I want to just give 2 other examples of like, we're not the first people like trying to, invent something like this. So Glyph is like an organization which was established about 10 years ago, because they had the trouble at the time that financial institutions were not really perfectly identifiable. So they said, we need some kind of like, they passed a law that it's mandated that every financial organization has like an identifier which is unique and very clearly associated. So what they've done is, and you see here, just like a phone book where you enter like a name of a company, and you then find a bunch of, let's say, details about this company. You can find where they are registered, like all these details, addresses, like all the like standard things you would want as a unique phone book entry, like a global registry. The interesting thing is with Glyph, it's not that Glyph, it's a little like DNS. So you have ICANN, which is kind of controlling all the .com, .org, blah, blah, blah. And then you have other registrars to own like whatever the subdomain of .io. It's not controlled from one central organization. The central organization is basically associating that registrars can now register domain names in a country. Like DE is controlled in an entity in Germany, and you have like the ICANN just pointing to that registrar. So that makes it more decentralized in a way that it's not like one organization controlling every domain name in the world. Glyph has done something similar. So Glyph as an organization is defining processes and has then local, like the LEIs, so like basically local entities who then associate the identifiers itself in the country. So that's kind of like a more somewhat, let's say, decentralized model. So it's kind of interesting. And then there's another one, which is from British Columbia. They launched this like 2 years ago. It's a centralized system in a sense. So the authority is the government of British Columbia, as an example. And what they have done is they built a phone book for businesses within their province. And what you can see here is that, well, you go to like any example, and you will find not just, I mean, obviously the company, but also what they have already, as one of the first ones implemented, is exactly this link that you have a phone book with real names and processes like how it's filled. And they refer now to DIDs, which I think came up a few times. And that's kind of the foundation of how they now want to allow more entities. They can now say, this is the authority in our company who can sign whatever legal agreement as a CEO or as a whatever. So there are like bits and pieces already out there, which are like quite close to maybe what we are looking forward to do. And there are other examples like ENS. ENS is the Ethereum namespace thing, but it has no governance in a sense. It's a very technical solution, but whoever is first to says I'm Microsoft wins, and there's no, at least no process around this now that anyone can go, I don't know, against this. Whilst in DNS, if you're Microsoft and have a trademark, and Johnny registers Microsoft.io, he could legally be basically forced to give up this name. So that's just like 2 or 3 examples, and some of them are hinting in the direction of somewhat decentralization, and then with Orgbook goes into the direction of verifiable credentials and DIDs, and that's kind of made a segue towards Oliver. Oh, sorry.
Ruben, you had also mentioned the EEA registry. Do you want to hit on that, or do we just want to dive into?
I'm not really an expert, to be honest, on the registry. I think Andreas brought this up. I don't think he's in the call here today.
Oh, got it. Totally. Well, we'll talk about that detail tomorrow. But Oliver, DIDs and VCs, what's going on there?
Hi, I'm Oliver, also from Consensus. In case my connection is too terrible, please, Italo or Ruben, could you please then jump in? Should I share my screen or should I just use yours?
Just use mine. Just tell me to click.
Okay, right. Yeah, so I think you can already skip this slide. Now exploring solutions. We already heard about decentralized identifiers, DIDs, and we also heard about verifiable credentials, VCs. And yeah, we'll provide a quick intro and speak about things that might relate to the baseline community. Could you go to the next slide, please? Okay, so first, decentralized identifiers. It's short. It's no, the previous, please.
Oh wait. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I think we're good here. There we go. Yeah, they look similar.
Yeah. So DIDs, they will become a global standard in W3C probably next year. So last week there was a TPAC meeting in W3C, and they spoke about the roadmap. So it looks pretty good that they will release the final standard next year. What is a DID? It's a new type of stable identifier. It's a unique identifier, very similar. It also complies with the URI spec. And that's an example. It's just bit colon, example, colon, and something. And a DID is ledger agnostic, but trust can be rooted in any type of blockchain. For example, there's the Track3 element implementation on Ethereum and the Ion implementation on Bitcoin. So it's not, there's no vendor lock-in in that sense. What are the features of DIDs which are very relevant to the baseline community? It provides you with a way of discovering authentication and authorization public keys, and also some endpoints that relate to an entity. Any type of entity is possible. So when you do key rotation, or if you want to rotate the endpoints that are associated with that DID, then validators would automatically, they would see all these changes. You can have a stable identifier, but you can rotate the keys and the endpoints, so it's a level of indirection. The core idea is that a DID resolves to a DID document by leveraging a resolver implementation. You can have local or remote resolvers. Remote resolvers typically expose an REST-based API, but the input is always a DID, and the output is a JSON LD document or JSON document, which then contains the public keys and endpoints for that DID. Some of the applications of DIDs, by nature, it's basically a decentralized PKI system where everyone could create their own DID and keys, very similar to PKI, but compared to that, very, very decentralized. You can use DIDs to establish a secure communication channel with another DID. It's called DIDCOM messaging. And DIDs can also be used with verifiable credentials, which are the foundation of decentralized reputation and so on. I will speak about that as well. Could you go to the next slide, please? So verifiable credentials is also a global. It's already a global standard since last year in W3C, and it is a data model specification that allows you to model relationships between issuers and subjects or holders. And for subjects and issuers, typically DIDs are used, although the spec allows for any other identifiers as well. VCs are really just JSON LD documents that contain. This is a simplified representation, by the way, so there are other properties as well, but let's say a minimum VC contains the issuer DID, the subject DID, so what is the VC about, and then additional claims. It could be really literally anything. It could be the company name, it could be attesting that another company belongs to the same umbrella company, something like this. And the core piece is that you also have a proof of the issuer, which is typically just a normal ECDSA signature, such as SECP 256K1 that we all know of. And compared to traditional X509 certificates, VCs can be revoked, and certificates can also be revoked, but let's say VCs can also be revoked and they can expire. So some of the applications of verifiable credentials is you can link domains with DIDs. You can basically create an attestation in form of a verifiable credential that says that this DID belongs to that domain. And the spec that talks about that is the DID configuration spec, which we'll also briefly talk about later. And other applications that we saw in practice was you can basically create VCs about the corporate structure and relationships of companies, as already talked about. And literally any type of information about any entity, thing, individual, and even documents can be attested. So there's another part, another section in the VC spec that talks about verifiable presentations. So this is then another data model which talks about presenting these credentials by a holder to a verifier. So this is really, that would then contain an additional proof, which is called a or proof of control, so that the entity who is presenting the credential, the holder proves that it is in possession of the subject DID. Yeah, and the presentation would also contain the credentials themselves. So some people are using this approach for authentication purposes or authorization purposes, for example. Or yeah. So this is a very interesting, and I think it might be related to baseline as well. It's the DID configuration specification. It's an approved DIF, Decentralized Identity Foundation spec, which was initially proposed by Microsoft, but also other people, parties, members of DIF, signed up for that work. That spec allows you to basically trust that DIDs belong to a certain domain, a web domain, and the trust is rooted in TLS certificates, so existing internet PKI, and with all the flaws that we are aware of, but we need the solution right now, so that's the reason why I think it makes sense to mention this. Yeah, the security then relies on the configuration of the specific HTTPS client. The spec is really about a bidirectional linkage between a DIT and the domain. And bidirectional means through TLS and hosting a dedicated JSON file under a well-known URL. So this is an example. For example, acme.com could have a well-known endpoint URL, which contains a DIT configuration.json, and that JSON contains a domain linkage verifiable credential that proves that the contained DID in that JSON belongs to the web origin, which could be acme.com. So this, what you can do with this is actually quite cool because DIDs are not easy to remember, but domain names are easy to remember. So you could just use that approach to discover the belongs to a domain. Yeah, next slide, please. So this is also could be interesting because I spoke about DIDs are about public keys and endpoints. A very common approach in the decentralized identity community is also to use an endpoint that says, okay, basically indicates how the entity could be reached. And for example, and this is being used by the DITCOM messaging spec, which is now being specified as version 2 in the diff, but originated in the Hyperledger Indie Foundation. So this is really about establishing a communication channel using state-of-the-art cryptography with another DIT and using that channel to send other protocol messages. The main idea is that this protocol is transport agnostic, so it could use HTTP, BLE, but NATs or whatsoever. And in order to establish a connection, you only need to have the DID of the other party. How could you get the DID? Using the diff configuration, DID configuration spec that I was talking about earlier. So in this DITCOM messaging, again, it supports any type of subprotocol. So once you have established a channel, you could execute higher level protocols for decentralized reputation, for example, to issue credentials, to request verifiable credentials for the other party. You could even say, if the baseline community is interested in such an approach, then we could even say that we define we add the baseline message protocol to ditcom.org, which is a registry of all broadly available or publicly available DITCOM-based subprotocols. Yeah. So this diagram here also illustrates how this works. So in the first step, the only thing you need is to discover the DID. It could be either through a Phonebook service, through a domain name, an ENS record. So once my agent has that DID, I would establish connections through DITCOM messaging with their agent, and then through that channel, I could send other protocol messages across. Yeah, that's basically it.
Sorry, just to jump in here on this. So does that mean, like what I'm looking at here, those agents or proxies, could they be the thing that can give you the more assurance, meaning like they can resolve these things that you're showing at the top there, like 1A, 1B, 1C, and there could be many of those things. And then basically their agent at the bottom could be asking questions to my agent about those things. Is that correct? Is that how I should read that?
Exactly, yeah. So it's basically, this 1A, 1B, 1C is basically some out-of-band process. There exists tooling to solve that, but I would just provide the other party's DID to my agent, and then my agent would establish a connection with their agent, and then I could then talk asynchronously with the other agent, and then issue credentials or just request credentials about the other party to basically get a more trustworthy connection. This makes sense, based on verifiable credentials, for example.
Oliver, this has been very thorough, and you've stunned us into informed silence. Any other questions, concerns? Jake, what are you thinking?
No, I'm just thinking with the DID path, is there, I mean, in organizations, turnover is something that happens quite often, right? I mean, you know, everybody has an onboarding, offboarding process in place to handle employees. Some do it very, very poorly. In this type of system, where the DIDs are, you know, more or less in control, is that onboarding, offboarding process still part of this to remove or grant those permissions, or are those done in real time and I'm just not thinking about it in the correct way?
Yeah, so in my opinion, there's a difference. You have to distinguish between end user DIDs or people who are acting in a business capacity and organizational DIDs. So in that diagram, I was only speaking about organizational DIDs.
Okay.
So if an employee offboards a company, then the company would still have that DID. And then an agent could be a web service. It could be, yeah, it could be something like that.
I think, you know, this is specific enough. I think maybe some interested folks could break off and spec out how we would implement this in this case. That'd be an interesting breakout.
Yeah,
Absolutely. And I think oh, sorry, go ahead, Cal.
No, I was going to say is on the DIGCOM messaging side, because I'm not as plugged into that, how far along is that? Like, is there actual implementations of this running? Like, I won't say production, but are the people using this? Is it, what stage is it at, like, that people have used these agents for?
This is I mean, the technology is still early, but so we can see consortia in Europe, for example. Maybe Ruma, you're still on the call.
Yep.
Could you speak to that? I think that's.
If we wanted to use this by the end of the year for something that real businesses like, you know, like a Coca-Cola could actually use by January, what's standing in the way?
So people are using V1 at the moment. I think what Oliver was referring to is a lot of the work on the second version of this. So I think some people were using it the last year maybe, but I'm with you. Like, I think production, I'm not sure I would call it production. I think wait for, I think the more mature thing.
I think the last 5 years have destroyed all sense of what production means. You know, when you have the CEO of a 400,000 person company calling early stage work production, nothing's production anymore. If it works and it doesn't blow up, I think that's a good start.
And I agree, but I think so. I think so people, we might not need to use DIDCOM messaging, but because this is just a certain way of establishing a secure communication channel with another DID. But a DID document could contain an endpoint, which is basically just a NET's baseline endpoint, and then you could just you don't have to modify anything of your existing implementations. You could just use the same. And just use the DIDs and DID documents as a discovery mechanism for endpoints and public keys.
Let me put it a different way. If a company paid you $2 million to implement this for their procurement department, and it has to work, where do you sweat?
I would sweat. I mean, I think DIDs and verifiable credentials are quite mature, whereas DIDCOM messaging, I think that's something that is in development. That's why I'm saying I think DIDCOM messaging is not necessarily needed to make a solution.
So you wouldn't implement that in stage one of something. You'd wait for that to cook up a bit.
So maybe just to give some context, so there is lots of implementations on the first version. I think we just heard someone implemented now V2, but V2 is still, I think, finalizing some of the specs. So it's not completed yet. So V2 is not something you would use in January. If you can play around with it, sure. But I think Oliver was just mentioning twice now, like I think DIDCOM is just, I think, show you there is more. Like if we go in the path to
it's cool.
DIDs, the cool thing is it makes it easier for us to use verifiable credentials. It makes it much more powerful to use this kind of technology, which are optimized for decentralized communication, and as well, more things to come, like storage solutions, which are not at the moment fully centralized, which are also leveraging DIDs as kind of like an authenticity or like an authorization mechanism. So there's a bunch of more technologies in the whole stack which this community is working on. So if we start, we're comfortable to do something with DIDs, and this is the Phonebook one. So if we agree in the Phonebook thing that we want to do DIDs, then I think the industry will, I think, give us way more input and development resources towards something I think the baseline community can leverage.
So there's an old saying, they who show up get to decide what consensus is, right? So I don't know that that's actually an old
think
saying.
that's a 51 attack
I'm going to make it an old saying because I'm old.
Yeah. The origin of the Sybil attack.
Indeed. So we've all shown up. Does anybody here disagree with using that approach? Speak now. History will be made. If you dissent and you have and we were about to go in the wrong direction, you saved us all.
I just want to mention, I like that someone mentioned multi-sig and thinking of the permission to edit this kind of like editing a wiki, where you've got, you could use verified credentials as a permission point and pass the torch through DIDs instead of, counting on Azure permissions for which org can edit what. So,
well, the source of it could and should probably still be a cloud authentication, right? Or an account. Kale, you still up there?
Yep, I'm here.
I mean, what if we just went in this direction and said, okay, DIDs, cloud accounts, wire it up, go.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'm thinking about when we were sitting here talking about like production and like what are we sweating about? One thing I sweat about a lot with these is not sweat about, but worry about like how we're going to handle is the blockchain aspect of it, right? Which we haven't talked about too much here yet so far. So this part makes a lot of sense. I think it's awesome for the DID com piece and DIDs in general. Where those things get anchored, how they get anchored, who's paying, transaction fees, all that kind of stuff that goes around that stuff. I feel like there's a lot of details there. We'd have to like work out to say, hey, here's a solution that works, right? Like this piece, to me, actually, I feel like comfortable with, but the other pieces are like, okay, we got a bunch of other things, and maybe we can pull some of that out here in the next couple of days here to, at least we're covering all the big boxes and we don't have like a gap there we haven't thought about that's going to be like super friction,
Right. Yeah. I think that's getting into an interesting place where, okay, well, where does this, clearly we've got this smart contract that is already written that needs some more attributes, which I think we're getting into as well, right? What are the attributes that we need to add to the core interface of the org registry contract, which, we've got that concurrently happening over in the core, track 2 or 3. So Kyle and the team over there and Brian, they've already identified that there are some attributes that need to be changed in that contract. But then the interesting question, Evan, I see you popped up there, is what do you do? Who's going to pay for that? And I know we've got things like Infura gas and other things like that. They're popping up. In my mind, I keep on imagining there's a button in my control panel in Azure or in GCP or what have you. And that button says, get me and it gets to be fun. Like, where do you put that button so that people trip over it and click it? I love the make people click the button game. That's my favorite game as a product person. I think some product people have gotten too good at that. We've all gotten addicted to buttons, but so, where that button goes, it says, make me an org registry, entry. And then, my cloud provider charges me $10 or what have you. And then the cloud provider doesn't want to hold crypto to do that. So it runs that through, say, Infura gas or Infura transaction manager.
Yeah, I mean, something we've been talking about with Brantley on Ethereum or the ENS side as well is the same deal, right? Like, so cloud providers like Azure have DNS registrar capabilities, right, to do things like that. So we've been already, been talking for a while about like how we could integrate that piece and do the same thing, John. Like, so there's obviously some sort of gas that has to be paid there as well. But then that could be a piece of this, right? So if you look at this diagram, it's not just a DID, but maybe an ENS record, maybe some stuff coming out of Azure around your domain name, stuff like that, all feeding up at that one level up top there.
That's another
cool.
question, Mark, and I'll stop here. So clearly we do need to do more breakouts because we've already got a big enough thing. I'm feeling uncomfortable talking too many times, but which is the whole point of the summit, is to not have to feel uncomfortable about that. But yeah, I mean, is ENS, the way Brantley's thinking about it, and the Phonebook, is it the same thing? Could it be the same thing? I've been waiting around for the ENS thing to really pop. Are we a substitute for that? Is it are they good neighbors? What is the Venn diagram of the space there, do you think? I mean, you know me, I just want a damn contract on the main net with the directory in it. So
I think my gut feeling would be reuse the technical aspect of this, but you need to add some governance around this, because you cannot just have nobody acting as an oracle. Maybe you have multiple entities to act as an oracle, but this name squatting and confusing things, that's exactly why we have so much issues online, because there's a typo in the URL and suddenly you send money somewhere else. We need to avoid this. So I think there needs to be some form of authorities likely to maintain this. Maybe you have 3 or 4 registries and your client will check on 2 or 3, so that it's okay, it's not only in live and this other 2, and then if 3 out of 4 are fine, then I'm cool. I don't think it's a completely anarchistic, like nobody cares, like everyone can claim whatever they want model. I don't think that's why ENS is likely not the answer. And the good thing is, I think with DIDs, you can make this bridge. You can register an additional information into a DID document. You can also just issue verified credentials that you might be in control of this. There's a bunch of things we can use. We have the primitives, but I don't think they are like naturally overlapping one-to-one.
I was about to write this note, but I'll just say it. That's a thought that I had not ever contemplated before, was the notion that in this there would be more than, that there might be multiple phone books that would reconcile. I thought you were going in a different direction, but I like, so if I've got an Azure account or a GCP account, I click the button, it generates my registry entry into the org registry contract. That's as far as my mind went. You're saying it might want to simultaneously post that to a number of contracts.
So I think
or
like
different registries.
Think about this, how we operate in the real world. So if I want to show someone that I'm the one, I give them whatever, my phone number, my email address, and my Twitter handle. And because I can control all that, you have a much increased trust that I'm the right person than if I only control one of them. So now if you turn it around and say like you have identifiers maybe on multiple registries, and I go to whatever the Azure directory and I have whatever Microsoft.com in there, and I have it also on whatever Live's registry, that gives me as the receiving party way more confidence. Like I might be in country X and I don't trust anything coming from the United States because whatever, it's all corrupt.
But the registry is not coming from the United States. It's just
sitting
on the mainnet.
Yeah. So, but so it really depends on like who would be the oracle and who the other party is who's trusting it. So in certain locations in the world, you might say, okay, I'm operating something, whatever, in Hong Kong or somewhere else. I would want to have the one operating here. So I'm trusting the issuer of the data in this country because I'm the receiving party. You need to just establish the trust that the receiving party knows who the other one is. And
I see. You're saying you're back at not on where the registry is deposited. That can be the mainnet. You're talking about the source of the registration being, yes, say, Azure, and your argument is that it shouldn't just be Azure, a cloud provider. It could be other things. Totally agree. It does make me think about a different thing, though. You seem like you want to say something there.
No,
I'll stop.
I was referring. I think I'm separating two of these challenges. One is like who's the source of the trust, and then the second is how do you capture and like document this, and whether that's now one central smart contract which has entries coming from multiple oracles or issuers, or whether you have multiple registries and you have some software to query multiple smart contracts. That's a discussion we should have. I don't have a strong opinion here. Might be just one, but then how does it look like in whatever sharded world? Like how do we have multiple registries on different shards? I mean, the world can be quite complex.
Maybe this is the good maybe it's good that we're doing this now, because 5 years ago, we would have had to have a long, wrangling, multi-year conversation about how to let multiple different chains have, participate in the same identity regime. And now, yeah, we have DIDs. And I still think that we shouldn't wait around and get into analysis paralysis about it. We're mostly Ethereum folk here. The standard can be on any chain, but again, they who show up, and mostly Ethereum people show up here, we're going to deploy it on Ethereum. But as long as we write it in such a way that you could deploy it somewhere else and get a sync across chains, then we're cool, right? Then somebody else can do something.
I was referring to ETH2 and shards. So there's like what Vitalik recently wrote about the like layer 2 roll up kind of world. So you might have registries because you want to have multiple entries there.
Oh, yeah.
So now how do you reconcile if you have
you don't want to hostage this entire giant registry into a single shard.
Yeah.
So that definitely needs to go into the design, right? How do you distribute the registry such that you at least have crash fault tolerance?
Yeah. So I was not referring to the complexity of like multiple other blockchains. Let's keep it only on Ethereum. But then even there, I think just being mindful that in the next years, there's still things happening, and we don't want to be constrained that it's super expensive to make an entry into this registry. So we need to at least be aware that there's a high chance that the design needs to incorporate that.
That is really interesting. And I don't think, Johnny, you could correct me, but I don't think anybody's added that to the spec. So that's definitely a pace for the time.
All right, guys, I want to put a pin in this for a second. I feel like I've got 95 breakout rooms that I would like to start on. But before we part ways or think about that at all, I want to thank Italo for waiting so patiently. He has a bit of an answer to some of the hypotheticals that we've posed here around solutioning. So to start very hypothetical conversation in some more tangible approaches, Italo is going to lead us through some conversation starters that he and Oliver have worked really hard to put together that will help us to consider, as we make manifest these ideas well before 2021, getting those cards written. How could we go about doing this? So Italo, I'm going to invite you to dig in here.
Yeah, I was planning to spend much more time in this presentation, but I think we discussed a lot of things that I would cover here. I just want to bring the attention to what we've been discussing. I think that maybe we are talking about more than one solution, right? And a roadmap, maybe an MVP, and later some more robust solution. And I'm loving that because I think we can mix everything and get to some agreement. One thing that from the discussions and the UX interviews that we had that came to that flow that Johnny shared before is I see these flows of onboarding and discovering counterparties, right? So basically, you have someone. It can be Azure hosting this Phonebook, but Azure needs some way of verifying the authenticity of that entry, basically to prove that that organization belongs to that person and this domain belongs to this organization and that this key belongs to this organization. So they have ways of doing that. And that's what, in my opinion, is the job of this host that we are calling, the entity that is hosting the Phonebook. And at the same time, I believe it's very important to offer to the counterparties the same verification methods to validate that entry, right? Not only the host, because you remove a heavy weight from the shoulders of this host by doing that. And that's something that we should be aware. So if some solution that we decide to use as a host for the Phonebook is hacked, We have a second layer of verification that can be used to attest that that information is correct and trustable, right? So this is what I want to cover in this slide. Can you go to the next one, Evan? And just using the link to everything that Oliver presented about deeds and VCs, it's clear that deeds and VCs can be applied in much more situations in the baseline protocol, not only this phone book. But I think it's fair to consider, even for this MVP, the usage of that technology at some level. I'm not saying that it needs to be what I will propose here, okay? And just to be clear, it's only a proposal. We spent a few hours discussing that, me and Oliver, but we tried to get the best that we could to have something that can be implemented quickly. Yeah, I think it can even be mixed with the Azure approach that you suggest, John. So yeah, I try to explain here what we are thinking, right? Like Oliver said, the deeds documents are, in the deed documents, we can have the information that we need to link. Can you go to the previous one? Sorry, Evan, because there are some.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I got too excited.
So the deeds, we can store the data that we need, the public keys that need to be used to set up the work group, the endpoints, the communication endpoints. So we have ways to store that and access that through the deed. We need to guarantee that deed belongs to that organization, right? The way to prove that it belongs to some organization is simply by referencing some something that is signed using that deed keys to prove the ownership, right? And we have standards covering this type of solution, right? Of course, we have a lot of cloud providers implementing verifications by using DNS entries, resource in a website, things like that. Oh, sorry, I have my dog here.
Okay, tell him we said hi.
Yeah, so we have ways to solve, but all of them are proprietary implementations, right? They are similar, very similar, but proprietary. But we have in the DIF a standard that is the well-known deed configuration, that is a specialization of the RFC, that is the well-known URI RFC, where you can define a file that you will store in your website, in your domain, a well-known path containing your deed configuration, right? So basically, by having this file signed by the key that you will use to join the baseline work group, and inside your domain, it's enough to have a trust anchor for solve the problem, right? You are linking the organization, you are linking the keys, the endpoint, and it doesn't need a host. We need the host only to list this catalog, right? And of course, to bring some governance to that, and to allow organizations to be verified when they onboard themselves to this Phonebook solution, right? So, but it removes a lot of the weight that this host needs to deal with, right? It's a huge responsibility. Can you go to the next one? So just to illustrate and maybe make it more tangible, have you changed that, Evan? Sorry. Okay. take some time to
Oh,
update
can
here.
you see, does it say registration flow? Are you guys able to see
Yeah,
that?
now I can see. It took some time to change here. Sorry. So what I'm talking about is represented here. So the flow for self registration in the phone book would be something similar to this. I would generate my deed for my organization, and I would receive from Indeed agent. Indeed agent, just to make it more clear, is the we call an agent a service that is able to create deeds, to sign VCs using my deed, to communicate with other deeds. I would use this thing to create my deed configuration JSON file that I would store in this well-known URI in my website. What would be by doing that, I would be tying both the deed and my domain, and at the same time, by being signed, I prove that that public key is mine, right? And the host, I just go to the host. I say that I already implemented this deed configuration JSON file. And the only thing that the host needs to do is to retrieve this file from this well-known path, check my TLS, the HTTPS certificates, to check my ownership over that web domain. And it can trust and publish this entry in the Phonebook catalog, right? So this solution, when we talk about the host here, it doesn't mean that it can't. It can be Azure, right? So we can mix the solutions here and have that working quickly, in my opinion. And the same type of entry verification that we are talking about here, that the host is executing, can be executed by the counterparties as well. So anyone that gets the phone book entry to set up some work group in baseline, they can check if that is valid, that the host wasn't hacked, by instance, just by checking this well-known file resource in the website, checking the HTTPS certificates, and being sure that it belongs to the company they want to deal with. So basically, this was the approach that me and Oliver came together. I think that we don't have Evan, right? I will try to share here the next slide. 1 minute.
Hey, Natalia, while you're getting that, so that flow you just showed there, that's interesting. So you're saying they would register, the agent would get a DID, and that DID would be added to this well-known configuration file, but that won't be in a central website. That'll just be on, let's say it's acme.com is the name of my company. So I would make sure that I put that file there, and there's HTTPS or TLS there, and then stuff that's going to happen with the phone book is going to consult that, like go back and look for acme.com and look for that file when it goes to get it. Is that, am I reading that right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. So it's very similar to the DNS entries, to the other mechanisms that we already use, but it's using DIDs. It's using standards, and it's something that can bring other benefits later. So I want to cover one of them, because here what we are trusting is only these links between credentials, right, and proving ownership. But later we can use the VCs in order to improve this trust, right? So
sorry,
go ahead, Ruben.
So is it correct to say, based to Kale's point, is that the registry would basically give a name of a company and point it to a domain name, which I think is in many aspects the trusted source, because I go to whatever chase.com or whatever microsoft.com or cnn.com, and then everything else is there. So the registry is super simple.
Exactly, exactly. And it would be super simple. And in my opinion, if we, because we are thinking here about solutions and avoid conflicts of names of companies, right? But if we talk about a global solution, we will certainly have a lot of conflicts in naming, right? So domains are there to solve this problem. We discussed a lot the cases of subsidiaries because we would need to use subdomains in that case. And maybe the certificate would be the same in many cases. But it's something that we didn't have time to talk deep and come to a good solution. But I think it's something that we can achieve easily.
I think you could go even one step further, that the MVP of the phone book is not a phone book, because it basically is DNS. Like if you want to send something to Deloitte, you go to Deloitte.com and your system does the rest. And that's kind of a pretty good phone book. We call it Google or something. And like you find like often the company and have a certain level of trust.
Yeah, and it's funny because if you use a solution like this, actually anyone can onboard a company. Do you got that?
Yep.
If I want to onboard Coca-Cola and they have this well-known file there, I can onboard them, right? So what does that mean? At some point in the future, if we decide not to have a yellow page, a public one, we can start to have decentralized solutions for phone books, right? What I think it's interesting because like this problem with conflicts of names, imagine this large database with a lot of companies using the same name, right? Maybe it's not something good. You will want to have some subgroup of that, something like that per country. I don't know, just something that came to our minds.
One other question with that. Yeah, one other question with that. So because you're relying now on that well-known DID configuration file being correct, right? Just thinking from a hacker's perspective, if somebody hacked my website, because now you're basically giving it to control of whoever controls that website, and some people secure it good, some people don't secure it good. Is there something inside the DID document? Like, is it just the domain name? Is that how it's resolving that to say, like, let's say I'm an attacker and I say, hey, I'm going to take Coca-Cola and put a different DID up there because I hacked their website, right? So I put that DID file up there and I point it to a different DID for something. What's the, maybe that's too deep for this conversation, but this is what I was wondering, you know?
Yeah, but no, it's fair to.
So it's basically.
Go ahead, Oliver.
Can you hear me? I think that this approach really has the same security guarantees as if Coca-Cola was just putting the endpoints and public keys on the web page. So we believe that this is a good starting point because after you establish this ecosystem, then if you remember my slide with where I described DITCOM and credentials and so on. So after you have the DIT, you could then exchange and request credentials from that DIT in a later phase. But for phase one, I think it really boils down to the same security guarantees as publishing the endpoints and keys on Coca-Cola's website. That's true.
Yeah, and it's a good point, Oliver. This flow that we are showing here, it's an MVP, right? So it guarantees, but there are things that can be improved, definitely. And like Oliver is saying, if we would solve and try to bring the best approach, I think we would spend a lot of time, and there's a lot of things indeed right now that we can use. Including the DDCOM, that we can do some type of handshake, something like that, checking if I can sign that key that I'm talking about, something like that. I don't know. I don't want to go deep on that, but just one thing that I want to add here is this. We can solve many of these problems, Kale, that you raised only by giving VCs attesting that I successfully interacted with another counterparty, right? And these VCs can be shared with the host of the Phonebook to increase the trust and the reputation of some entry on that database, right? So once I implemented my workflow with Coca-Cola, and successfully, and I saw that it's valid. And after checking all and verifying everything, the deeds and the well-known resource, I can issue this VC and send it to the host, and the host can start to create and highlight the entries that have a better reputation, and you can use that VCs that are shared as a second point of verification. So if I have a VC attesting that Microsoft as an issuer saying that that did belong to Coca-Cola, it's much more trustable, right? So that's where I think we should use VCs. The first conversations that we had with the community about VCs, everybody thinks that VCs should be used by a central issuer, right? But in my personal opinion, it would be a mistake. We can use that to create reputation and sharing this heavyweight of proving that an address belongs to someone, right? So that's my approach. Yeah.
So in that model, I guess you would call them hosts, like they could, instead of it being centralized, each one of those could choose how they want to prove that this DID is Coca-Cola, right? So like if it's like implemented in like Azure, maybe there's like a couple things that it does that gives you the answer that says, yes, I say that's Coca-Cola because I checked these three things. But somebody else could have one that does something slightly different. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, but not only that, in the case here, in the example, I'm just saying that I had a successful integration, a baselined workflow running. But you're right, you can issue any credential. But the difficult of doing what you're suggesting is that you need to agree with the community that you have this other type of credentials, right? So in my opinion, once you have these workflows running and have people attesting that it's working, you are talking to the right company. In my opinion, it's enough. You don't need to go beyond that. Personal opinion, okay? It's a personal opinion.
Cool.
So guys, we've got a few questions in the chat. Alex inquiring after how we might, implement, what is this, DIDs, SASL mechanisms. Alex, do you want to elaborate on that question a little bit? Bring that to the group. Oh, I think we.
Hi, sorry, I was looking.
Oh, no worries, no worries. Go ahead. So based on the number of folks in the other sessions, I think this will be a little more chill today. So we'll just let people roll up. I just dropped an invitation in the chat. Andreas will be joining us in a few minutes. Were you guys able to join any of the core interfaces conversations yesterday or earlier today? Oliver, Italo, do you guys have a chance to
No.
to join that chat? I feel like at some point we should sync up with Sam and Kyle. I've sort of bopped in and out, but I just haven't been there during the periods of time when they're discussing messaging. But for the cookbook conversation, I was able to catch a few of those moments. But just so that we have a larger surface area to vet our thoughts about DIDCOM, it might be cool to bring that subject matter to them after and just figure out, you know, what kinds of requirements and challenges they found with the phone or the what am I saying here? With the messaging solutions.
Yeah, I also didn't have a chance to join the call, unfortunately. But was the call recorded?
Yes, they're all recorded, and these tracks have been a little bit amorphous in sort of when you're meeting them. So you kind of have to hit it at the right time. So don't feel bad, Oliver. Don't worry. I've found myself wandering into a number of empty meeting rooms myself. So it's part of this challenge with the community is just making sure we're getting everybody at the same time. So it looks like we've got a pretty awesome showing from our enthusiastic, hardcore crew, people who are constantly dedicated to the conversation around the phone book. So very excited to see all of you. So we'll let folks trickle in for a moment or two before we get started. But just for level setting today, what we're going to do is just a quick refresher of our conclusions from yesterday. And then in a few minutes, Dr. Andreas Freund is going to guest star briefly to get our creative energy going and provide us with a few market solution references that he finds particularly compelling. So hopefully these can inspire us to think about different ways that others have approached similar challenges in their own vertical spaces. And we can, take some of those learnings and best practices into our consideration of the baseline phone book. And for today, also, I want everyone to be especially solution oriented. So I invite us to think about our two outputs as we proceed through the conversation today. Firstly, we're going to be focused on what tangible next steps can we take as a group to start to make manifest these ideas that we're coming up with here. So how do we want to think about, taking down this information and channeling it into a workflow with actually getting some fingers to keys, as it were. And then secondly, we're going to focus on the hackathon topics for the upcoming Gitcoin hackathon. So John Walpert challenged all of the tracks here today throughout the Baseline Summit to think about what sort of action-oriented or hackable, weekend tackleable challenges would dramatically prove some of the questions that we're trying to assess, and would also help us to quickly put together some real running machinery demonstrating the value of Baseline. Actually, I'm realizing I was not on the agenda. Oh, sorry, John. What was that?
2 weeks. So the Gitcoin hackathon runs 2 weeks. So
2 weeks.
You could scope it to that kind of time frame.
Fantastic. Yeah. Well, what a gift. Here I was thinking that we were going to be limiting ourselves to 36 hours, but it sounds like we've got a lot more bandwidth. So with that in mind, perhaps.
But of course, the other output that's really key is, and Anais O'Frank is really pivotal for this, and also Kyle and the maintainers is, what are the changes that the core interfaces or the reference implementations need to contemplate, right? So irrespective of whether there's a bounty issue, we need to prioritize how the protocol needs to change.
All right, fantastic, John. Thank you so much for adding that in there. So everyone, remember, these are the topics that we're going to keep close to ourselves as we proceed through the conversation today. So yesterday, we'll remember that we had a pretty in-depth conversation about this solution proposal led by Italo and Oliver, and we had a fantastic set of questions that folks brought up on a bunch of different platforms, and a number of people who reached out afterwards. So thank you so much for your enthusiasm there. It was really exciting to see everyone come together and based on those who are in the room, think about our pros, our cons, our ways of moving forward. And so based on the feedback that we got yesterday, it sounds like decentralized or DIDs and VCs, I'll just use our shortened terms here. DIDs and VCs are sort of the way that we want to think about this challenge moving forward. And so it's really awesome to have some of those refining requirements in there that will help us to narrow the conversation toward delivery and focus on, as John was noting, being able to make some really tangible offerings, not only to the hackathon, but also among ourselves. So to turn this group into, an active writing workflow that is consistently seeking feedback from our community, but also putting into action the words that we are considering here today. So let's see, so I realize I'm jumping the gun a little. I'm about 5 minutes early for Andreas. Italo and Oliver, are there any other reminders that you want to share with everyone today as we consider our conversation from yesterday? Anything that we want to point out or revisit really quickly at the top of this conversation before we dig into our solution references?
I think that just a quick recap of that would be good, right?
Yeah, that would be fantastic. Thank you, Italo.
Yeah, and Kale from Microsoft had some good questions when we presented that. I think that when we think about DIDs and VCs, at least in the discussions that we had in the channels with the baseline community, we think about using VCs from a central issuer telling who would join this phone book. But what we proposed is a little bit different. The use of VCs would be used just to bring reputation for entries in the catalog. And the main thing that I think that is the one that we need to pay more attention here is the use of this well-known DID configuration. That is a file stored in the domain of the company that wants to join the phone book. And basically this file contains the DID configurations with all the information, the communication endpoints, the public keys, and it's signed. So you can use this file, not only the host of the phone book, but also the consumers of this phone book. They can use this information to verify the authenticity of all that, right? And also in combination with the certificates from the HTTPS server. And this is I think the core of the solution that we presented yesterday. This is not something that needs to be, how can I say? We can continue thinking about solutions using Azure. We are not discarding that. It's a solution that can work together and can improve it. It's an MVP. It's not something. It's something that can be improved during the time. And of course, we can have many other benefits of using these and VCs, not only for the phone book.
That's a great reminder, Italo. Thank you for mentioning that, although it sounds like, DIDs and VCs are uniquely well suited to the initial problems that we've described here today, there's like the free gift with purchase, the secret benefit of utilizing this approach. Because as some of you may have noted in the article we shared around from Oliver yesterday, there are an additional set of functions and benefits from these foundational elements, such as DIDComm or secure messaging made possible utilizing these elements. And so, of course, this is just the very tip of the iceberg in terms of additional functions that could be made possible by utilizing this approach. However, in order that we not confuse anyone and that we stay sort of focused on task for our work here, we can sort of keep that as an on the back burner. But if anyone is especially interested in or curious about the sort of side benefits of these technologies. I know there are a number of people on this team, certainly in the room here, who would be very excited to speak with you. So this goes for everyone who's watching on YouTube, who might be looking at this recording later. Please absolutely join the Slack channel for the Global Phonebook, where this conversation will continue after the summit. What we'll be doing in this conversation is defining what those next steps look like, but we'll be using that channel as sort of a management tool moving forward to make sure that everyone stays informed of the latest, and we have a continuous and open call for participation and input from folks as well. So I think we are just excitedly anticipating our guest star here. I'll pause for a quick second to ask for a little bit of feedback. John Walpert, if you happen to be around the orbit, is there anything else that you want to ask us to focus on here today?
Just keep doing what you're doing. This is fantastic. And obviously, you know, I keep on applying the mental model. I think that, you know, having the fortitude of getting it down, and you guys have done a great job of this, but getting it down into codable bites of stuff and really, you know, small stories that can be written and executed on. You know, and again, by the way, be mindful if there are things that you want to make into a product or that shouldn't be public domain, you know, make sure that that doesn't get into the record because all this is public domain. And take those conversations offline. And, you know, so if you want to build something that's some kind of business, but yeah, where it's public, yeah, it'd be great to get these things into something we can execute on. I would love to see somebody get the first iteration of this up, at least testable by the end of the year, certainly in January. So that would, you know, that kind of time frame. Like, what can we do that wouldn't be an abomination in that time frame?
All right, thank you, John. Well, that is fantastic and very tangible. So guys, our success criteria is non-abomination. That's a new one. I don't think I've ever used that, but that's great. It works, very specific. And our time frame.
There's an old phrase, you know, don't write it, but write no code that would make it hard later.
All right, so we'll do an earnest sort of approach to that finish line, looking at a Q4 or early Q1. But we'll you know, constantly imbue that sense of openness in our design. So trying not to make decisions that would be prohibitive or unduly limiting. And then you heard it here first, folks. John Walpert is actively encouraging all of us to think about, you know, product and service offerings that might surround this ecosystem. So as a take home, after we talk about our open and shared infrastructure and ideas, remember there's a little treat in it for you. So consider where
I'm stealing all your shit. All of this, I'm stealing it all. I'm going to get rich on all of this great work. No, I'm kidding. Just for the record, I'm kidding.
Hey man, you know, we can all do well. And I think, you know, there are a lot of opportunities that we haven't even turned over yet. Just wait till we get to those hackathon prompts. I think based on the big bags available for baseline projects for that hackathon, I certainly think we'll have a lot of takers. So now
somebody's going to clip that out and give me a lot of trouble on that statement, I'm sure.
If John starts talking about using a coin as part of the phone book, then we need to exit.
Exactly. Yeah, you hear the word token, that's, you know, that's your safety word, guys.
phone book coin? Yeah, no, I think not. Evan coin. That's a coin.
You know, I'm pretty sure that like personal tokenization is
somebody did that.
Is a trend. It's sort of like an offshoot of the quantified self. It's like, you know, not only how many steps am I taking, but also, you know, what is my tokenized value? So we'll work on that for the next hackathon. But first we need to have a directory of selves to quantify.
Tokenized company. Oh, that's called stocks. Yeah, okay.
Hey, I mean, I don't know, a consensus, it could take a lot of different forms, certainly. But before I get jokes up in here, let me ping Andreas. Stop sharing for a quick second. Any questions, concerns, thoughts before we get into this? Let me just send him this invite. Yeah, the non-abomination test harness is pretty great because it reminds me of the United States Supreme Court standard for certain content. They just say, I'll know it when I see it.
Yeah, just since we have a few minutes here, just to go on what Natalio was mentioning there around, we had some ideas around Azure and how that can help here. And I just want to kind of like solidify that, whatever we land on there, typically the way I'm using or trying to use Azure and cloud services is basically just to remove friction to automate things, right? So as part of this process of how that workflow would work, again, I'm always thinking about like, how can we remove friction, just make that easier for somebody who's already familiar in this environment. So that's what I'm thinking about as we keep going forward there from the Azure perspective of like, what can I do here to make the automation faster, easier, remove friction?
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kale. That is a great reminder to all of us that we can utilize Azure and environments like it as a sort of a safe and known pathway for our enterprise audience to engage with baseline, and also to introduce the functions of baselining into a visual vocabulary and then a sort of software environment that is known and non-scary to our audience. So thank you so much, Kale, for your expertise and for that reminder. So guys, without further ado, I think we have the famous Dr. Andreas Freund here to give us some awesome solution references about enterprise directories. Andreas,
right, they let him out of it. I thought we put him in that one track, and he's not supposed to get out of that track. What are you doing, man?
we sprung the top off the cage because we decided that we couldn't, no solution reference discussion was complete without an Andreas appearance.
You've let the genie out of the bottle now.
All right, Andreas, I'm happy to hand over control of the slides or to click on whatever, you tell us.
Yeah, just let me share my let me share my screen.
Fantastic, thank you.
Okay, give me. I promise I won't bore you for more than 15-20 minutes tops. And then I'm out of your hair. So I want to talk to you about the work that has been done within the Communications Business Automation Network, which is it is the first blockchain consortium in the telecommunication industry. So the telecommunication industry has broadly speaking 3 main consortia. One is the TM Forum, the other one is the GSMA, and the fourth one is the Metro Ethernet Forum, MEF. MEF is also starting to, and GSMA, and they're all starting to look into DLTs, right? Because that's less scary than blockchain, and telcos are scared of pretty much everything. So C-band is dedicated solely around the future of connectivity. So this is cband.net. Check it out. I'm going to dump this one really quick in the chat. So if people want to check it out. So a lot of work has gone into several things. Number one, the business cases for this consortium. And there are 3 that have been and then the realization that just like if you want to get produce from a farmer to the grocery store, you need what? A road. And the road is not built by either the farmer or the grocery store. It's built by the public, right? So similarly, right, if you want to do settlements of transactions between 2 carriers, between two telco providers, for example, digital data services, you need to connect them somehow. And if you want to use DLTs, you need a blockchain, you need core services, right? So that is where I want to take you right now. This is, there's over a year's worth of work in this document. This has not been 100% finalized, but it's close to. So this is the conceptual view of the C-band reference architecture. As you can see, there are 3 main business use cases that C-band has settled on: wholesale voice settlement, data on demand, and mobile roaming, all with the goal of automation of billing and reducing the friction in billing and automating that. Now, that's all good and fun. The goal here is to be able to interoperate between the different stacks. On the one hand, on the other hand, such that you don't have vendor lock-in. On the other hand, if you do that, you need to figure out, and that's where the core services come in, sort of like the road, the public road. It's identity assurance and governance. I'm not going to talk about assurance and governance, even though those are fascinating subjects. And there's C-band is going to be the first consortium that is actually going to utilize reputation on chain. Woo! With tokens. Woo! So I want to talk about identity. Okay. So let me what are the core services around identity? Because C-band had exactly the same problem as baseline. They needed a goddamn phone book, right? How do I know, is that AT&T on the MVP data on demand application A is and wants to do business with Verizon on data on demand application B? How does AT&T know that it's talking to the Verizon application and the other way around? Unless you're talking off band and you're going like, dude, are you yet? No. That's not cool. It's not cool. It's not efficient. It's not. All right. So let me find. Sorry, this is a little bit of scrolling. I just wanted to show you there's a lot of stuff there. So those are all requirements. Anais, Frank, if you're there, this is what a baseline requirements document standard should look like in the end. Where are we here?
Can you give us that link again? Sorry.
For what?
Get that over to Anais. I'm sure she'd be interested in
for that document. I'm sorry,
like
that's not
student of it.
That is not quote unquote public yet. So.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah.
I'm good. There is, however, a public link to a draft of this document that is published, and that's on the cband .net website.
Mark my words, I think Anais Frank is going to be the chairman she's going to be be able to teach the PhD course at Harvard on doing standards sooner or later.
Right.
She's
so right here. So we define. So this is the first identity section. So I'm not going to go in. I'm just going to describe briefly the scope that we have identified in terms of like owners and things, and the ones that we have are in yellow in green. I'm colorblind this morning. Are the ones that cband is focusing on, which incidentally is pretty much exactly the same thing that baseline is focusing on, right? Organizations and independent customer employees, right? I mean, correct me if I'm wrong here. So, we have produced a suggested high-level reference architecture, an identity capabilities matrix that is actually already in the public sphere. So if you guys want to reference that, want to look into that, and leverage that for baseline, be my guest. It's all there to peruse and use. What cband decided upon, it is for its identity system, it's going to use DID, W3C DIDs and verifiable credentials, so decentralized identifiers and verifiable credential. There's a whole spec on that. There are requirements here, and this is the first thing that I want to talk to you about, because this is what I've been like harping on Slack and driving everybody crazy and being a royal pain in the butt about it, right? It is, how do you know that AT&T is AT&T and Verizon is Verizon, and how can they trust that once they, they hand over their identity card, so to speak, their C-band identity card, AT&T hands it to Verizon and Verizon hands it to AT&T, that they know that they're it's really AT&T and C-band and Verizon. Well, it's the, oops, sorry. Wait, here we go. So because C-band is a consortium, right? We had it a little bit easier than baseline, because they're members, right? So members need to join C-band before they can operate. So there is a process of membership. Part of the membership process is to create an identifier, a DID for each entity, and then after that they can create more DIDs. And also, once that initial entity DID is created, issue a verifiable claim that, by the way, this DID is AT&T, and here's the verifiable claim issued by the identity of C-band. And C-band is the trust anchor, is the trust steward of the identities, because they've done the KYC and yep, you're actually AT&T, and yes, Teddy Chu, you're the representative of AT&T, and you signed the agreement, and we're all good, right? Membership agreement, and we're issuing that credential. So what are we actually putting in that credential so that all the telco IT services and IT guys don't freak out? We're putting X509s in there, right? Don't use X509s. They're a pain in the butt to work with, but everybody's using them. But we consciously said, no, we don't. We're using them only as called claim material or evidence. I think it's now in the latest spec. It's utilized. So translating that to baseline, if Microsoft or a number of others that come together and say, yes, we are the stewards of baseline, and we have X509s because we're a CA, we're issuing them, and we say, yep, you're good. So that then you can substitute C-band for any number of these baseline stewards, so to speak, that are well known and well trusted. The other thing is that identifier document is then actually written as a DID document, and then the claim itself as an anchor is anchored across the multiple chains that make up the core service. So that is unique for C-band. We decided we're not going to fight the DLT stack wars, and we're saying any DLT is okay, right? As long as you meet the requirements in the reference architecture. And then once you have demonstrated that, we are endorsed, and then everybody, all the signatory members of C-band are running actually a core services stack. So that means they're the provider of the road, coming back to my original example. So what happens now is, and I'm just going to go into.
Hey, Andreas, I just had a couple
yes.
questions there. I don't know if now's a good time, or maybe you'll get in.
Sure.
Two things. One is when they're stored in multiple chains like that, in the DID document, should I assume that there'll be like basically links for that? So if somebody said, "Hey, this is AT&T's DID," how do I know which like all the other ways I can look at it, right? If I say, hey, it's on Ethereum, it's also on Bitcoin, it's also on Corda or whatever.
Excellent, wonderful, excellent question. Let me show you. Not tell you, let me show you. If I can find it, that is. Well, sorry if I'm making people seasick. This is actually a sample DID document. So, so here, this needs to be updated because the DID core working group is like got a panic attack, and suddenly it started to change virtually everything. Anyway, This is now public key is now called verification method. Anyway, so what you have here, so here the public key property, that's the ID, and it tells you which key. Let's say if your chain uses and supports RSA, as for example Corda does, then you have this the public key can actually change the DID document. And so there's an IE verification key that doesn't have to be on chain, right? And then here you have authentication, and these are the keys, the DIDs and the keys that can sign on behalf of that DID. And as you can see here, it's public key base, Fabric public key. That's an ED25519 key. And here you have an X509 key. What is that? That's the Corda public key from the X509 certificate. So if you have Fabric and Corda as your DLTs that you anchor the DID document in, you know that, hey, if my application actually runs on Corda and my other application runs on Fabric, that's perfectly okay, because I have now here the keys that I use to sign for each application. So both, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Right. And then here we have that's a credential.
So I would have a comment on that, actually, right? Question or comment, I don't really know yet. So this also assumes, so they have invented their own DID method that's indicated by DID : CBAN. So the CBAN DID method apparently works on any type of blockchain, right? So I don't think that the baseline community needs to go down that route to define their own DID method.
We maybe just be using DID web or DID key. This is just an example that hasn't been definitively decided yet.
But shouldn't, yeah, I think my point is that the baseline community, whoever wants to baseline documents with each other, if they decide to use DIDs, then it's probably their own responsibility to choose their DID method. Also, I don't think that we should limit people to.
No, you must. Sorry, it's like there's you need to decide which ones to support. You can support many, right? But you need to you're talking about the enterprise context, right? And you need to you can't just use any old DID method. That just simply won't fly with we've had this discussion for a year and a half with these guys, and I got them to the point where it's like, but the DID method needs to have certain security properties.
No, absolutely, I agree with that, and I think a document like this would also make sense to describe which DID methods are the recommended ones. So I agree with that in general.
So and then here, this is just an example of a no, that's a DID. Where is the other one? This is a credential. It's like CBAN membership, blah blah, issuance date, expiration date, credential security. So this follows the W3C DID VC verifiable credential spec. So this is the method that is used, and then we have defined. I'm going to go all the way down. Oops, where am I here? Yeah. So we have defined here the CRUD core services for identity. Something similar you probably should have for if you want to have a standard, and then define what anchor proofs, blah blah blah. Here are the 12 for DIDs and VCs. Each operation. So like high level. This is not a full API spec, but it's going there. right? So that's then, so create identifier, get identifier, update identifier, blah, blah, blah.
I think, so do you think that we need to do the same? I mean, my opinion, so there are already a lot of different DID methods, and each DID method defines their CRUD operations. Wouldn't be just sufficient to just say, okay, these are the recommended DID methods. You can just choose from any of them, and then you're fine. Because in that case, we don't need to describe all of that in such a document.
Yeah, but that's true for the identifiers, right? For the DIDs, not here for the identities, right? So this is the VCs.
Yeah. Okay.
Right, for these 8. You need to have, how do you request the identity? So hey, I want to create this, right? Here's my DID, issue me that credential that says that I'm a CBAN member.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
That I'm a baseline, I'm a verified baseliner. Right. So and then request that, and then okay, and here's the create, and then there's a create identity that needs to be executed by, you know, someone then who gets the request, the issuer. Then you register the identity, you know, that get registry, request update identity, revoke identity, request identity presentation, right? So these are all the right. So if you're telling me, hey, I'm this, okay, you know, give me this, present me your identity in this manner. So I just wanted to show you what others have done, right? I'm happy to answer any more questions. I'm just saying that a lot of work has already been done. This is not only within CBAN, also in MOBI, which is also going to launch the Open Mobility Network. Actually, MOBI and CBAN are working together officially. They've signed an MOU. The goal is to operate this core infrastructure, these core services together for both the telco and mobility ecosystem. Anyway, enough said. This is just to give you a perspective of how things can be done and how we're actually building this right now. So the CBAN and OMN, they're building their prototypes of how to, you know, do like create identifier with a core service. So it's and how to interoperate between 2 applications through VC presentation and then VC verification. So that is being built. So I encourage you to look at that and maybe not reinvent the wheel.
Yeah, because that was actually my point that I would have to make. That I would have made is because I see there's request identity, create identity, and so on. I mean that relates to protocols that other communities, especially in the DID focused communities, already have solved. So I was wondering why, for example, they wouldn't have just reused one of the Hyperledger Ares protocols for issuing and sending proofs.
So that is actually a lot of the stuff that's in there is based on that. So it's just, again, you're talking about telcos, right? You're talking about enterprises that are, you say Hyperledger Ares. Oh, is this a standard? Is this an accepted standard everywhere? No, go home. So it's like literally go home. End of discussion, right? So what I'm trying to impress upon you, you need to, and again, once it's public, I have it to share, you will find DITCOM basically embedded in this document without calling it DITCOM.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So you need to, you know, it's like, so you need to take out the components of DITCOM that make sense, wrap them in a language that the enterprise understands, and simplify it down. Right. So Jose, you know, JWTs, you know, and the JWE and so forth, that kind of language, they understand. Right. It's like, that's what they understand. Oh, okay, it's like that. Yeah, it's like, yeah, and there's message, their message decorated. Oh, okay, that makes sense. Yeah, if you're saying no, this is the standard, use that. A, it's not ready. B, it just scares the shit out of enterprises. So I'm just sharing with you that fairly long and at times arduous road that we had to walk in order to get to this point where you will not get an enterprise right now to accept what's currently being done in the DIT VC space just like that. It just will not, right? Even though I'm also working with the U.S. government on that, but it's a long process, right? And we want to launch this fairly quickly. So we're calling it inspired by, and most of the components are there. So it's just my advice, because we're talking about enterprise, we're talking about extremely conservative organizations, and you scare them, they run away and they'll never come back. You know, it's like the Easter Bunny. You scare him, he's gone for a whole year, and then might come back, and that's a long time. So you just need to tease them out, make them comfortable, speak the language that they can understand, and make everything very, 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 very nice and safe. And so that's just my thing, right? So that's why it's called DLT. It's why there are permission DLTs and not public DLTs and blah blah blah. So anyway, my
Lame.
I know, John. It's like, dude, it's like
you're gonna get Paul Brody making fun of you. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. Do you want to trust math, or do you want to hold your breath and pray, Andreas?
You know what? It's like I have no issue duking that out with
I'm so kidding, of course, but
I know, but it's like,
we know
this
are
is about
trigger
getting
words.
shit done, right? This is
Of
about
course.
getting shit done. This is about getting organizations that move at typically subglacial speeds to at least move at glacial speed plus one.
Well, in all seriousness, no, though, that's why we have 30 hours so that we can go into rat holes. I was just responding to Brian Bellendorf, who had a good tweet this morning about what happened with California defunding all the there's some snafu with unemployment bank accounts and Bank of America.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a comment that a friend of mine, who will remain nameless, but who really knows what they're talking about in banking, it laid out for me recently how many people in a typical bank who are corruptible have the ability to change the ledger after the fact of GL. And that and I don't want to be quoted too much on this, although we are live on TV here. Is it the FBI? Or the Fed? Yeah, I think it's the FBI estimates that the amount of fraud perpetrated by that technique, by changing an ACH number or something, or a band number late after the fact, is in the billions a month. And in contrast to that, to have our friend like Richard Kendall Brown complaining about probabilistic finality, it just pales in comparison. I mean, that is definitely not a final system. If somebody can go in and change something surreptitiously,
there is no absolute finality.
Exactly.
I've had that argument with Swanson back in 2015, and it's like no, it's like it doesn't matter. There is legal finality, right? That's it, and that's only when both sides agree upon that is final, and that's it. And then you still have legal issues after the fact because someone comes out of the rat hole.
Yeah, I suppose that is a point. There's redress, right? If my employee screws up the ledger and I can claim, then the bank is held liable. I suppose that is true.
Right. So, but it's nothing is final ever. Right. Nothing is ever final. It's just settled until someone complains. right? And then the whole thing can blow up even 20 years later, right? It's or until the statute of limitation runs out.
So if I can probably do Evan a favor and bring us back to what is coming back up top of here. What have we got in terms of nettable content from this? So what can we actively build? What can we generate issues on based on this knowledge that we just got?
I mean, I can tell you, but it's like, it's not.
Tell us.
No. Why? Why should I? Come on. It's like, that's unfair.
I mean, in general, the solution, the CBAN solution, looks like they have a trusted issuer system plus DITs plus VCs plus some deviation or a profile of DITCOM. So that sounds very similar to what we had in our mind. And to get the trusted issuers plus the whole governance structure set up, I think that could take a while though. So that's why I think that's why I was proposing, or we were proposing yesterday, something that is rooted in existing trust frameworks and trust models, such as the Internet PKI and TLS certificates, but with having a clear upgrade path to something like what the CBAN people are going to implement, or what is being proposed. Does this make sense, or would you disagree with that, Andreas?
I would. So here's the thing, right? And I've gone through this with you know, some CEOs of those carriers, and the upshot or the punchline of it was like, yeah, I'm happy to do that because I know I can sue the shit out of CBAN if it you know, and I'm a member, so it's like I can, you know, it's like I have a modicum of control over it. I have people who I trust who look into that and make sure there's nothing bad happening. Because those systems that are going to rely on that are going to process billions of dollars every single month. So it's like there's if something goes sideways, that's decidedly uncool. So if you have, and so just from my discussions, both with mobility providers such as BMW and Mercedes and Ford, as well as, you know, AT&T, Verizon, Orange, Deutsche Telekom, China Telecom, and so forth. If an issuer of a verifiable credential is willing to stick out their neck legally and say, yup, that's the identity, and yup, I vouch for that, come hell or high water, and that entity is a trusted entity, well known, and has a deep enough bank account, go for it. Otherwise, I guarantee you people will have issues. I guarantee you that. I've just had it like 25 times happening to me. So
if it doesn't happen in a year, how much ETH are you going to give me?
In a production system that supports a few $1 billion, I'll give you 1,000.
1,000 ETH?
I'll give you
I'm kidding.
On video.
I'm kidding.
No, it's like I give you 1,000 ETH if you can put up a system with an identity system that has like several $1 billion a month run through it.
All right, guys. Well, we are not yet at the demand side of several $1 billion a month. So I'm very hopeful that this conversation will end up there. Andreas, thank you so much for this extremely helpful and detailed example of what others have done to set forth a rigorous model that both mitigates risk and also takes into account the inherent relationship of those counterparties. I definitely think that this will be something for us to study and learn from. And as John mentioned, we'll make sure it makes its way over to Anais, who we will certainly be working with to advance the conversation around standards here. And Oliver, I think that your summary around, you know, having a glide path to that level of rigor and excellence is a pragmatic one that will allow us to explore and to build in the near term without prohibiting ourselves from reaching that level of rigor illustrated by Andreas in our own manner and in a way that is befitting to the needs of the baseline community and those enterprise decision makers. And this example has also been a really outstanding reminder to all of us that not only do we need to come up with these exciting new concepts, but we also need to present them in a way that is logical to and amenable to our enterprise audiences. So putting on our product marketing hats and thinking about that every step of the way, even as we hang out at the protocol layer. So we are now a little bit, let's see, I think we're most of the way through the introductory meat of our agenda today.
Just 10 hours to go. Oh no,
actually,
we only
I'm going to make a quick pause before any further questions for him. Other than thanking him for his time. Thank you so much, Andreas, for stopping by and sharing your expertise.
Yeah, no worries. My pleasure.
Thanks, Andreas.
All right, thank you so much.
Hey, before we pass on too far from that, could I ask a question for Cale?
Go for it, please. Questions for everyone.
Well, what Andreas was saying got me thinking. I mean, again, it really is going to come down to the time frame that selfishly I'd like to see is going to come down to whether or not and probably Azure, because you're here, right? And if you can set the pace for everybody else, then that's great. I certainly have no problem if for some period of time, I'm friends with the other cloud providers as well, and I'm encouraging them. They've got their own sort of dogs in different hunts, but I think that there's a clear leader right now in terms of this identity work or the corporate Phonebook work, and that's Azure. And so it really comes down to what can Azure and Microsoft do that is safe for Azure and Microsoft and can be done, quickly, that passes the not abomination test frame. What are your thoughts?
No, yesterday when I think it was Italio, I'm sorry if I got it wrong, but showed that workflow, the proposal to potentially be dropping these documents, maybe you can pull that up, Evan, into a root and using that. And again, people jump in here and tell me if I'm not thinking about this the right way, but the way I was thinking about that, I think it's actually down there, registration flow, Evan, is the one I'm thinking about.
Sorry. Yep. There we go.
Yeah. So what I was thinking about was if we use this model, at least to start, basically the idea is someone's claiming that they're this person, and because they own the website that goes along with that person, and we can drop the thing over there, do we need a centralized figure there who's also kind of blessing and creating those verifiable credentials, or is that functioning at least partially as that?
Isn't but you said Azure has already got that locked, right? So if I have an Azure corporate account, and I think we're still talking about just corporate, right? Not Yellow Pages entries, not White Pages entries,
mm-hmm.
right? Then I thought you said that that part has already been locked in, right? You do that in order to give somebody an Azure account to begin with, right?
Not to give them an account, but to bind, to say, hey, we know who this person is because they proved that they own this domain. But my thing is, and that's, yeah, that exists, right? That's part of what's inside of Azure right now. My question is, though, in that model, if you just followed that and said, well, Microsoft has a service that's going to issue claims, then they're the central figure, right? They're the ones with all the risk to make sure that that service never gets hacked and all the kind of stuff that goes around that kind of stuff. But my question is, though, is that even, how much of that is needed, though? Like if the user is told, you follow these things and we'll basically help you facilitate that, right? So the first half of that registration flow over there, we can essentially automate or make that clickable. Then the other people who are querying it to say like, hey, I need to know that this is Coca-Cola or whoever, it's done through this framework. It's not 100% reliant on like, well, Microsoft said they're Coca-Cola, so I believe it.
I think that is exactly right. It's and I've in fact, I cut my teeth on this back in mid '90s when I coming out of grad school. Fun fact, all this stuff about relitigating the idea of what libel liability is for providers. I did. We did our MBA competition was on a service that when we decided not to start that company because in those days we did not have good case law on whether or not you would be liable for somebody's libel. So it's kind of funny that, but in going back to that kind of, I was at Georgetown, so we had a lot of lawyers around. I'm reminded of what some very good law professors told us about this, which is really, if you're providing a fact, you might be held accountable for the fact, right? But not for someone else's use of the fact.
That's correct.
Right. So in this case, you can say, yes, this person generated from their own account these attributes and put them into this phone book. And those attributes did come from us, full stop.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
And I think that falls within the normal flow of what, an Azure account does for things all the time. So I wouldn't want to overblow the concern there. Certainly for MVP, and certainly for the fact that I don't think Baseline is going to be running banks at the front phase of what people get litigious about, which is like, I have your money and now I don't have your money.
Microsoft just needs to sign the VC that domain is a verified Azure domain. Done. Right. I mean, but also, you need to sign it.
You can also control your phone book entry from your Azure account, which, as a practical matter, eliminates a lot of things that we would spend a couple of years building. Properly.
No. That definitely should be it, but it needs that Microsoft signature, and there needs to be a on the Oasis or it needs to be an entry that says, Microsoft has this DID and has these signing keys these are the verification methods. These are the signing keys, blah, blah. That needs to be up there so that anybody can verify independently that the claim was issued A, by Microsoft, and then B, in the phone book, that claim belongs to this company. Right. So and that there is only that one company, and then there is no other company of the same name, right? That exists in that phone book, and only Microsoft, because they're the first one, have the right to write into that phone book. Right. That's the key thing. Right. You're doing it on behalf of a requester, and you're writing that stuff in there, right? And only you.
Why is it not possible to rely on existing internet PKI or TLS certificates? I mean, TLS
because there is no one. There's no one to put a noose around their neck. That's why.
The CAs eligible,
and that is an absolute an absolute requirement.
So CAs today, they're eligible. They do the customer due diligence, so to say. They check the entity of whoever is behind the domain. Typically. And if some CAs are not doing that, then we could just have a whitelist of CAs that
we can do that. We can do that too, as long as they're assigning a VC. That's fine. Right?
Just one thing that this flow that I presented yesterday, it's only the registration one, and I think that can you see my annotation here?
I can't see any additional.
Yeah, I see your circle there. Circle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So these two steps in this solution, it can be executed not only by the host, but any verifier, right? That wants to check the authenticity of that information. But after all this flow, there's something that can be improved. And I think it covers what Andreas wants, that is to have someone really accountable if something goes wrong, right? So, but in my opinion, I was talking about that with Oliver. In the case of the Baseline protocol, I don't think it needs to be a unique entity. Maybe we can have VCs being issued by more than one. So we don't need a host that is Microsoft and he's the issuer. Maybe we can have some entities elected to generate these VCs. And we can use the same flow we have here, but at the end we add one more thing, that is to have one VC available to verify the authenticity, right, of the data that we are receiving from that phone book.
Yeah, I guess the devil's advocate to play on that one is, if there's more than one entity and something goes wrong, then who gets blamed and how does that blame get sorted out, kind of thing. Just playing devil's advocate here.
Yeah, in that case, I think that because in CBAN, you have someone controlling and work group, right? I believe that in the baseline protocol, it can be applied in several industries. So maybe for each one of them, we can have someone elected as the entity that will issue the VCs. And maybe we can have some work groups where they don't require this type of VCs, right? So this approach is flexible, and we can add on top of that VCs that can be or not required depending on the industry in the case that we are solving. And yeah, it's just one additional step here. But we are talking about MVP. I think we can bring a roadmap because to implement this, I think it's very, very simple. It removes, like I said yesterday, this heavyweight that Andreas always mentioned that is necessary for enterprise solutions, but it removes this heavyweight from the Azure cloud if we decide to use that initially for an MVP. So yeah, that's what I have in mind.
I like that idea of like it being industry specific, maybe even, or something like that. Maybe where it's like, hey, for this group of individuals, this is who they trust, right? Maybe people in certain industries trust Microsoft, but maybe other ones they don't, right? They trust somebody else, right? That seems interesting, right? Like if we could do something like that where it's more abstract and allows people to define these things. But you know, for this one, right, there's only going to be one phone book, right? So how would that play out in the future, right? Because it certainly, like, you could have a single entry there today, and then maybe it could be multiple in the future or something like that, which brings a whole other set of problems and benefits. But how do you see that? If you say, like, it's, maybe I'm reading that wrong, but like industry specific stuff that people trust.
Hey guys, real quick, I'm gonna ask us to respond to this question and then to pull it back, just because we want to focus on this V1. Although Kale, I really like what you're doing here in terms of asking these questions to make sure that our V1 does not block us in the future.
Yeah, sorry about that. We can move on.
No, go for it.
Yeah.
Here, Oliver, any parting shots on that topic before we move on?
A lot, but let's move on.
Okay, all right, we'll put a pin in that. I promise, Kale, we will come back to that subject. It will not go unanswered. So just sort of in the interest of moving us along, guys, I want to make sure that we reflect on the fact that we had so many awesome questions submitted. These are just a couple examples, but thank you so much for everyone submitting questions on YouTube, Slack, DMing them to me over email. We have aggregated as well, some on the Jamboard. And so what we did was we took some of those questions and we pulled a few of them out to these slides to discuss in greater detail here today. So the first question that was posed, and it came up in a few different forms in a few different ways, but folks were asking, what are the benefits of a decentralized approach here? What exactly are those sort of edge benefits that we're talking about? And so Oliver led the charge in terms of creating a really comprehensive set of perspectives that we might consider when weighing the values of a decentralized approach. So Oliver, can I invite you to elaborate on these a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So this is something that I just put together today. So why do we actually need a more decentralized approach of proving control of one identity or just decentralized identity approach at large. So with decentralized identities, you won't have honeypots. So for example, if you have just one big phone book, then it's more likely that an attacker would attack that and just replace some contents there. Whereas if you have a more decentralized approach, then you suddenly don't have these big honeypots anymore. So I'm just now referring to the solution that we were discussing today, where we put this dit configuration JSON file under a well-known URL. So in that case, an attacker would need to attack a web page one by one. And so it's, yeah, so the damage and the impact would be definitely smaller compared to a more centralized approach. Then we would also be able to add additional trust anchors such as Glyph, which is which we learned yesterday from Ruben, or what is going on in the European Commission. So they have this ESIF initiative, which also intends to stand up a SSI infrastructure comprising trusted issuers and so on. So we should be, so I think in phase one or for the MVP, we don't need to consider that, because I think that's a longer term vision that we get all these trusted issuers on board, which is still valuable, I think, and we should definitely design our solution in a way that allows for that. And if you have a decentralized approach, then you won't have a vendor lock-in. I mean, compared to OpenID Connect, for example, when we leverage Azure Directory or Google or all of these OpenID Connect providers, then would also always be locked into these vendors and maybe even to cloud vendors. We want to have an open solution that supports all kinds of clouds, all kinds of, you know, maybe even people who don't even use a cloud, I don't know. Then a solution like that, based on DIDs and VCs and the well-known configuration we learned about yesterday, would make sense. And with DIDs in general, you would allow a company to have the ability to do key rotation, to the endpoints, and then they can also implement the security controls that they want to comply with their corporate, compliance requirements. I think one important point is also that no third party would see which company is interacting with another company, which I think might be an issue with more traditional centralized approaches such as OpenID Connect. We also learned that verifiable credentials can be revoked. This is specifically important in case of an exploit. Then for phase one, exactly. So the well-known URL configuration approach that we talked about yesterday would basically allow us to have to not need a central governance structure, because the trust would be rooted in existing PKI, Internet PKI, certificate authorities, the DNS system, and so on. This means actually there's less work involved when we add certain companies to the phone book, because we ultimately defer to the ownership of domains and the liability of certificate authorities. And of course, if we use DIDs, then other use cases such as trusted P2P messaging, aka DITCOM would also be possible. And we also saw that Andreas's presentation on CBAN, they're using a very similar approach. So that would allow us to exchange verifiable credentials in the future to gain more trust, to enhance the trust of the counterparties. And yeah, so again, I think if it's more decentralized, then you would need to have more, then you need to execute targeted, attacker needs to execute targeted attacks, which, you know, is typically more resource intensive. And yeah, that's basically it. Sorry for yeah.
No, that's great, Oliver. Thank you so much for that extremely thorough and multifaceted response. I think this collection of considerations you've put together really helps us think about the variety of consequences when we choose a centralized or decentralized solution in any setting, and particularly highlights it here as to, what sorts of risks and benefits we need to consider. So before we move on, I know that this was a question that popped up in a number of different forms along the way. Does anyone have any questions for Oliver, or any requests for clarity on any of the benefits that he just discussed?
I think one thing to think about, like, it's not a blocker or anything. I think this is awesome. And if we started with that, I'll call it the domain-based approach that was kind of shown there, thinking about, like not being locked in, not just like vendor lock-in, but locked into that architecture forever. It's a starting point using well-known, to reuse a term, things that exist out there in the world that people trust and use because they have to use the internet. And, once we get to a certain point, I think where I'm looking at that is like, could we go to like ENS or something even more decentralized than the domain-based structure even in the future? I feel like this architecture makes that easy, or leaves that door open, right? So there's no lock in there to say we have to throw this whole thing out whenever we get people onto this more decentralized approaches to things. And I feel like it's not a question, it's more like a comment. I think this is a good architecture to kind of like let us expand in the future.
Thanks for the comments, and I fully agree with what you just said. So this architecture would allow us to leverage verifiable credentials from different type of issuers, because I would expect that more natural trust anchors such as GLIFE or the European Commission or whoever, or DHS in America, there are a lot of initiatives going on at the governmental level. They can be then easily leveraged in the future if you follow this approach.
I like it. Can I have 3? I'll take 3.
You got it, John. We'll box them up for you.
of questions, and I missed part of it. But just to clarify, in phase 1 of this, is it assumed that I should hope so, that one would have to be coming from a cloud or something like that. That way we reduce, right? So you just say, yeah, I know it should be more, but right now, if you're not from Azure, GCP or something, you're not going to get on this phone book, right? And we'll get complaints. Second thing is, if this is a smart contract and it's public domain, which effectively it is now, because we've done all of this in public domain, what organization would be required other than contributors to public domain open source, do we think? I mean, what kind of legal entity, beyond the fact that there's a smart contract, is it just simply a public good? It's a registry that's on the mainnet.
I assume that in terms of following the story of legal liability, the persons who yielded the keystrokes generating that would probably be the de facto responsible parties.
Sure. That's liability for an entry, but liability for the maintenance of the code base and it's not like it's a SaaS thing where I'm paying for a server to run and I am the person that's collecting rents for it, or yada yada. Right.
That's a great question, John. That actually gets into some of it. It sort of reminds me of one of the questions that had popped up yesterday, which is, how are we handling the blockchain aspect of the phone book? That sort of calls upon how are we handling the logistical, organizational, and maintenance facets of this offering. So, John, to your point around, maintenance support, it definitely seems like the complexity just that we've discussed today of what the Apex implementation would look like might have to be a bit more than a standalone public good. As elegant as I'm sure and a solution might be, the breadth of opportunity for this service, I think, to add value to the baseline universe would be best benefited by a dedicated team, I think,
so that would mean
in the future.
If you want to list, it would be not just a publicly maintained thing on the mainnet, but getting on there would be what you got to pay $5 to a gatekeeper, and I still think for Kale, I mean, if I want to list, if I want to click the button in Azure, which I hope to see soon, would be, the give me a baseline identity button, right? That Azure then would, they'd bill me some amount of money for a one-time hit to deposit that data.
That Azure sort of onboarding and initial flow is absolutely where we're anchoring our thinking. And I think that would make a lot of sense to be a gate, or, you know, where that handshake or exchange is occurring. Another thing that sort of floated through my mind yesterday was like, you know, are we inviting, and sorry, this is a little bit, maybe a little off topic, but are we inviting enough accountability from an operational perspective as opposed to merely a credential perspective? So we're not asking people to stake, for example. You know, we're not asking them to
there's
put
no
up,
Phonebook token.
You know,
it's not on
funds or funds or resources or anything. And so what kinds of resource exchange or, you know, feeling of gravity might we imbue into this onboarding process? So you're, you know, describing like one-time fees for engaging in certain actions. I think that's definitely, you know, something to consider. So this is just something to sprinkle in the back of our mind.
I'm no DAO like Maven. I had my doubts about DAOs when they were, you know, back in 2016 or whatever. I'm not a, like, everything's got to be a DAO and everything's got to be maximally decentralized. But in this case, I have to think, you know, you're putting a smart contract on the mainnet. Once that's done, and if it's done with open source code, you can have a nonprofit. I mean, we could probably put that under Oasis to say that Oasis is governing what code gets compiled for that and what is considered. If somebody took that code and created another Phonebook out of it on the mainnet, you can say, well, that is not the certified one, right? That's fine. You can do that. Reputation will also go forward with that. But other than that, I mean, it is kind of DAO-like, and it will charge fees because you got to charge some. It's going to charge a token, or it's going to charge at least gas to deposit something on it. But hopefully, it's simpler than. I mean, you know, I was very hopeful of ENS in this regard, right? But it just ENS. You know, even for the most, you know, pro ENS person, it takes a lot of effort, a lot more effort than I should like, and because their goals are different, right? They're doing a lot. They're more maximal. They want to do something more than that, right? But this should be easy, and it should be super easy if you have an Azure account or a cloud account, if you're the administrator of that account. But it's still going to cost money or it's going to cost gas at least. So there's your fees. And unless one is trying to get rents out of doing that, which of course would have problems, because then somebody's going to say, well, you know, we don't like that. Well, you know, you're a gatekeeper. This is centralized. Right. I mean, I wonder how much it needs to be run by a going concern. And I guess I hate to say I'm playing devil's advocate, because that's usually a cop out, but and here I'm just trying to explore the space here.
Well, as we think about, you know, governance, fortunately, that's predicated on the assumption that this is a wildly successful utility with a you know, massive audience and great need for continuous demand. So while we're on the way building toward that, let's, you know, revisit our thoughts around this V1. So you know, Italo, Oliver, Kale, and others have walked us through some of these considerations around sort of what a first version might look like. Are there any other thoughts, blurts, things that have occurred to us over time that we want to jot down with respect to this initial version, to this initial test? Because we've talked a lot about, you know, what the sort of eventual consequences look like, what kinds of things we want to consider when it does come time to, you know, bring this to the big dogs in the boardroom. But for, you know, day zero, are there success criteria that anyone wants to call out that we may not have spent a lot of time focusing on just yet?
100 companies list in period X.
All right. And, you know, period X, what I heard, John, was we'll get it started Q4. We'll have it running Q1. How's that feel?
Runs Q1, by Q2, there's 100, or Q3 or something. Yeah, let's sandbag that a little bit. Let's say by June, right? If it's up and running and in production and not embarrassing, say January, and then just flow it from there. So within 6 months, you got 100 listings. If Kyle does one of his clients, that's, like 70 listings right there. So.
All right, Kyle, we're coming for you. And your sweet on promise of onboarding. All right, so any other considerations for that first version? I think one consideration that I'm going to put here
10x a month,
is
10x a month per month, 10x, either 10x a quarter or 10x a month, depending on how much you want to sandbag, would be, for some period, and then it would curve out from there.
All right. So what it sounds like is we're going to need to identify a roadmap, and we're going to need to identify some contributors. So we've got a few folks in this chat who I know are part of the maintainer squad, which is awesome. But I think we're going to have a little bit more generative energy. So as we continue through this conversation, please think about where you see yourself in this project moving forward. And all roles are open, all contributions are welcome. So I'm not saying, of course, this is something we need to solidify today. We'll have a little roundup after this summit where we can invite everyone to return with their thoughts and think about, how we want to concretize this moving forward. But this is an open call. This means you. I will come and tap on all of your shoulders later.
Hey,
yeah, John.
I hate to belabor, but that is the point of this, and we got 10 minutes before the bottom of the hour, unless anybody needs to go to the bathroom. One last thing here. Mm-hmm. I got thinking, me, I'm a but person, right? So, but I'd like to see this, but it should just be a smart contract and DAO but what you said, but what if, what if this was a trust, right? So you said, look, anybody that's contributing the work, because you want, you want perpetual development machine, right? And that usually requires compensation. Right. But we could create a trust that says, every listing puts money into a trust or a trust contract. But, I'm old school, so I think of a bank account and a trust. Right. And, I've been wanting to do this for a while, this scheme. I wrote a story about it called Get Rit, if you look it up on Medium. The idea being we have some known way of measuring contribution, and you get some points against the trust it's not sellable. It's not a security. You can't sell it to somebody else, but you can take that note of points to that trust and collect at any time of your choosing, the total amount in the trust times your points over total points. And that gives you financial incentive to contribute to the work, but it creates effectively a trust which can be managed by a nonprofit foundation.
All right.
And so now you have the Phonebook trust.
Very cool premise, John. This definitely seems like the kind of thing that we should discuss with the other corners of the baseline universe, because I think there would probably be a lot of thoughts, considerations, contributions there. But that's a wonderful suggestion for how we might get a sustaining drive here, because as we want to explore all of the potential expressions from most minimal to most elaborate, all of those require a little bit of firepower and participation. So before we define what the be all end all means, we've got to put in a little bit of intellectual labor to get there.
Man, I live in the future. So this is already done. I'm thinking about the next thing already.
Oh yeah, I mean, we're 100 listings. So speaking of those next steps, let's get super concrete. So Ethelo had to step out, but he and I spoke a little bit earlier just about, updating the GitHub issue. We want to make sure that the discussion that reflects online is an extension of the rich conversation we've had here, as well as conversation on Slack and all those other wonderful platforms that we talked about. And so what we'll probably do is just, draft up a response that summarizes the conversation that we had here today and yesterday, as well as some of the outstanding questions and our intention for continuing to follow them. So just for everyone here, that's our plan for how we plan to update that GitHub issue. And then we are, as I mentioned, going to sort of look to the baseline summit for just an example on how folks are reconvening and continuing that community engagement. We got some great pointers from Daniel and team for what the QuickBook is doing. So we want to make sure that our efforts are complementing theirs and are always an easy on-ramp for those who are coming into the baseline community as well. So to get really tactical with our last few minutes here together, and I know we've got another about I think half an hour or so, but feel free to trickle in, trickle out as it works for you. But to get really, the December 2020 Bitcoin Hackathon, which is happening in a matter of weeks. Exciting. So Gitcoin, for those of you who may not be, is essentially a bounties platform allowing contributors of all walks of life from the blockchain community, from design thinkers to engineers, to perform microwork contributions to a variety of different projects for compensation. And when I say microwork, I mean these are tasks that you can pick up and contribute to pretty readily. They don't require a dramatic amount of onboarding if you're already fairly familiar with the space. And so the beauty of Gitcoin is that it is both a vibrant community and a vibrant set of projects that are always on and asking for collaboration and new ideas. And so the wonderful thing about the hackathons that they host is that it engages their community of builders and thinkers. So there's an entrenched audience for these prompts. And so the really wonderful thing is that we can assume a level of technical literacy with this particular audience of hackathon participants that's maybe a little bit more challenging to assume were you to extend these prompts to a hackathon set in a different venue or with a different audience. So with that in mind, Oliver, I'm gonna call again just to provide a little bit more detail around these hackathon prompts that you had. So these are a reflection of the conversations that we've had over the past few days, a number of the prompts or suggestions that have come up in conversation. But I think Oliver did a really wonderful job of summarizing some pithy directions that are brief enough to be tackled in sounds like about a 2-week timeframe hackathon, but would be dramatically valuable in moving this effort forward. So Oliver, want to talk about this a little bit?
Yeah, I can briefly talk about this a little bit. So I think we had a lot of good discussions today and also yesterday. And I think in order to make this vision become reality, I think we need to solve a couple of issues, which I put on this slide. So first of all, I think we agreed that it makes sense to leverage Azure or the existing Azure ID authentication. We could then create a plugin on Azure that allows people to create working groups and also invite counterparties to working groups. So under the hood, what will happen there is could leverage the well-known URL approach by just looking up a certain domain. Then we get the information from that domain, which is the DID that is basically verified or trusted because of the internet PKI that we were talking about. And after we have the DID, we would get the endpoints for baseline and the public keys that are needed to verify the signatures. There could be one plugin on Azure to create such working groups and invite counterparties to such working groups. Then we need probably also another plugin on Azure that allows you to join these working groups. I don't know if it makes sense to only respond to existing invitations, or if there should be means to join working groups that are somewhere visible, just without having a dedicated invitation first. Then the third piece that will be needed is this spoke about discovery of DID based on a web domain, and the third point is really about this. So you could basically discover the DID, and with the DID all necessary information to interact with other counterparties based on baseline. Yeah, that could be a piece of agent software. And then, so the first three items are basically what we discussed as phase one. And then the fourth item is actually, so after you got the DID established, then you would be able to establish a connection with the other DID, and then you would be able to exchange credentials to get more trust about the connection and the counterparty. Italo, please feel free to jump in if you have anything to add, or anyone else if you feel you have other ideas.
Yeah, I think the other one the scale that's missing, or maybe it's inside of one of these, so maybe it's just not called out as a full bullet point, is the thing we were just discussing about, the first half of that diagram of like creating a did, getting it out there in your well-known location and all that kind of stuff leading up to basically what this does, is pretty much like free, other than, we write automation or libraries or, helpful things to help people do that. But there's no cost to the blockchain. My point is, the only cost to the blockchain is when we update the Phonebook, which would be, maybe this plugins thing that's going to do that. Then we need to have a model for how to pay for transactions, because I can 100% tell you that Microsoft doesn't hold crypto and won't hold crypto, and that's a problem, right?
Well,
so
Brian on the call, and if Sam's still here, we got a solution to that, right? And I think that's a real opportunity. I mean, So I will be partisan here and say, look to Infura and the Infura transaction service that's in private or about to be public alpha, I think. And right, Brian?
Yep. Private beta is the next milestone, and we were looking to have for this December hackathon some access to that for participants, so they don't have to worry about paying for the transactions.
Yeah, and obviously, Kale, it should be a pretty slam dunk obvious play for Azure in general to create, to make it possible for customers to pay for mainnet events without having to hold crypto through by effectively, they're on your paper and you're just passing through, right? So if the cost from Infura gas is $10 to you, then you're just passing it through to the client.
Yeah, and we have some mechanisms in there in our transact engine that can basically do this kind of thing, right? So if somebody's got credits in Azure, let's say, and they want to use this tool, so instead of paying for compute, maybe they pay a small microtransaction to do this, but they pay with their Azure credit, and behind the scenes, Infura is getting paid what they need to get paid.
Presumably the same way that Twilio gets paid when when somebody uses Twilio through you, right?
Yep.
Which is not as easy as it sounds. I had to deal with that, at least at IBM's cloud. That was a monster of a thing to make work, but I assume you guys have got that going.
Used to be really bad, but it used to be really bad with us too, but our e-commerce stuff, but it's the transaction engine is much better now. It's they call it dimensional based billing, which is basically like you define the metric, you tell us how much you want to charge for it, and then basically you pump data into it to say, here's what happened. And then obviously you have to prove it if someone disputes it.
Man, 6-7 years ago, nobody had this going right? Marketplaces sucked. Anyway, sorry. I'm reliving pain. All right, moving on.
Yeah, and that's probably part of that agent, but it's I just wanted to call it out because it is a piece of work.
Great call, Kale. So thank you, guys. Does anyone else have any sort of thoughts, approaches, preferences for these hackathon prompts? I was thinking that perhaps we could, get everyone nice and familiar with these prompts, and then as homework, we could ask people to vote. To run here and just drop a little mark next to the prompt that you think is most compelling or most intriguing. Now, John Walpert, before we get into do that, do you feel like these prompts are aligned with the type of subject matter that you're hoping to submit to Gitcoin? And if we provided a little more detail around these, would these be sort of the on theme with what you guys are looking for?
Yeah, at high level, these look really, really good to me. Brian, what do you think? Or Nick? I think this is the result of this is obviously really good thinking.
All right, wonderful. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, yeah, I was just say the same.
Is there
awesome.
Is there anything else on the, I call it the front end side of this? So the stuff we kind of glazed over here a little bit, where like maybe for MVP 1 or for the first one, that's just manually done, but creating that did document over there, getting it in the location, all that stuff, do we just assume that'll just be like semi-manual for MVP? And then, once once basically the configuration DID stuff is in the website, then these kind of things can take action to update the phone book. Are we just assuming those are out of scope for MVP1 and it's just manual?
Is there anything in Azure is there anything that's not in Azure that would be missing for me to get this? Are there any attributes that are not already in Azure that couldn't be automated into a pretty straightforward, effectively as close to an OAuth experience as possible?
What about using AD or AD B2C? Is that?
In what way? What do you mean, Brian?
I guess I was kind of thinking through like maybe down the road, but like once you've established the counterparties, like using, I was just thinking another, it just was top of mind the other day. I was looking into the Azure B2C stuff, and the Azure AD B2C, and like how a single individual user could like participate as under a counterparty using sort of John mentioned OAuth, and that was like the trigger word for me. Some kind of enterprise user authentication layer. It's like the intermediary between like you the user, and the entity that you work under for participating in a blockchain data exchange, or sorry, a baseline data exchange.
I mean, those are typically like, I won't call them peer-to-peer, but like as it is B2C, basically like it's between two entities, right? That's where I have trouble with like trying to figure out how that would work with like a mesh. I mean multiple entities here, because typically it would be like, hey Brian, you're not in Azure AD, but I am. So I'm the business, you're the C, and I'm going to invite you, and essentially a guest account or something gets created in my AD that represents Brian, and now Brian can do things with me. But typically that's like on a point-to-point, like a business direct to someone basis. Maybe we're bringing people off the internet, like consumers that are not other businesses, those kind of things, into the fold. It could be another business, and it's just a single account that they're using to access something over here, or multiple. But that's where I'm a little
In this case, the tyranny would. I'm sorry, Brian. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
In this case, the tyranny would be, for the short term, would be, okay, I want to, I'm going to, if I'm the top level administrator of my Azure account, right, then it should be click, right, or as close to that as possible. And all the material is already in Azure because I have the Azure account, right? Unless I misunderstood it. There's nothing that I need to go get from somewhere else, is there?
That's right.
Okay, so then that should be automatable. And then, the process of connecting with the other party, that's going to happen. They need to get their phone book entry, or have an 18 or an org registry that's manually set up. It'll right now that we're in phase one. If it's Azure, then they would have to have an Azure account too, and they would have to go through the same process and get their phone book entry, right? And then we would be able to baseline. So you wouldn't need to do the procedure you were just describing, but yeah, that does mean, and I'm fine with that, frankly. Personally, I think that that's, anybody has a problem with that, say, well, fine, get your thing on this. Don't let Azure have it all.
Actually, I have two questions, and probably one of them is more like a comment. So the first question is, are we going to spec out all these hackathon prompts more clearly, so that people on Gitcoin would be able to implement some spec? Because I think it's good to give them some freedom, obviously, but what is the process of defining these items in more granularly?
I think we could put up a folder, do a pull request. I mean, like, could do it now. Put a pull request up and create a folder in the. I'll defer to Brian on whether this should go into a new BRI or into existing BRI, or into the examples folder. But it could be, the phone book project in the core, or in the baseline repo, or in stand up another repo for this. I don't care really. I might care if I think about it harder, but right now, either way would work. And then, we can start layering on detail and maybe even get some code in there as well, so that the submission of the work from the Gitcoin hackathon would go into that repo, and it would have to get approved by the maintainers, which is a good reason to do it in the core, or in the, not in the core folder, but in the /baseline repo, because we already have that regime well laid out.
Yeah. I think, so we're talking about these hackathons, what I'm looking at on the screen, like each of those being a Gitcoin bounty, and what with the work that's done in relation to those. Yeah, I kind of feel like that they're it's like the first one jumps out at me is like, I don't know if that should live in the, I guess we can figure this out later. We don't need to do this now online, but I don't know if they all would necessarily need to live in the baseline repo. We might want to define them a little bit. So we need a place where we can define them a little more. So that seems like the roadmap repo would be a good place to start, right? And then if we can find homes for them where it's appropriate, like the Azure plugin, I feel like maybe that should live somewhere, maybe its own repo, but I don't know. I don't know if we have a good home for it yet. Maybe we just need to make a folder.
Brian, how about this? What if we just work on the text for these and refine and add a little bit of substance around them, as Oliver was suggesting, in a neutral location, such as in the Google Docs that live on from the summit. And then once the sort of protocol and process is established for how these hackathon prompts are going to be iterated on other tracks, we're happy to mirror whatever makes sense. Just want to make sure we're doing.
Wouldn't do it in the Google Docs. Wouldn't do it in the Google Docs from the summit, because those get boxed up, and I'm not sure they live on.
Okay. So then we will host them elsewhere, but I think to spend a little bit of time evolving these and adding a little bit of detail before them.
Yeah, not to be too prescriptive, but these should go into the repo I just linked there. So we should go from Google Docs to .mds, and they should go in the actually they should go in GitHub. We should put a folder up or into the /baseline repo for any file work, and the issues go into the baseline -roadmap. That's how it works. So issues and epics in the baseline -roadmap repo. Anybody here who doesn't have the ability to control issues and epics in the roadmap can send me their GitHub ID, and then everything else is pull requests into the core /baseline repo, I should think.
So the way I'm thinking about this is like we have the main specs up here in the Phonebook registry stuff on GitHub in that repo, and then for each one of these things that are going to be on GitHub, they're kind of like, I won't say mini specs, but they're like a subset of that, right? That's surviving this little piece that's going to do that thing. Based on my use with Gitcoin before, being very prescriptive and not, you have to allow people some freedom to create things, but also make sure there's enough guardrails to that, because if it's not tight enough, we don't get the right result. So we can have them point back to the main spec and say, hey, this is part of this bigger thing that's going on here, and here's the mini spec or the mini thing that we need to build here, and be very prescriptive about what we're looking for there from an outcome on those Gitcoin bounties.
Yeah, somebody could write the tests, right? That we could write tests for certain.
Yep.
And it's again, if I think I think because we want this work to, if there's any work that shouldn't be public domain, then that shouldn't go in the repo. But we've done yeoman's work on having the legal around a public domain institution already set up in that repo. So if you're putting it in the repo, there's no question about what you've done and what you're agreeing to. So that's a good reason to put it in a folder in there, unless this group wants to do something that is exogenous to that, where they want to create a product or something like that, in which case definitely don't put it in there. And that's up to you, right? And there's no baseline law that says you can't just go off and build something outside of the public domain repo.
Yep. Okay. I agree. I think though, my only thought was like a separate repo because of this. Like, I don't really know what an Azure plugin means, and if that is something that is easier to have in its own repo for deployment purposes, then that would be the technical decision. But yeah, having the mechanics to set up all the ECLA, ICLA signing and all that is probably best.
Well, we could write it in that repo, and then somebody could steal it and put it up on their own repo as a deployable thing. And stealing being a good thing in open source.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sounds good.
I just try to keep the number of repos that the Oasis folks have to maintain down to a minimum.
Which I'm sure they appreciate, John. They have plenty of things to do.
Yeah, like run the summit. I can't believe how much work they put into this. Anyway, sorry.
And how much work we're all going to have after this. So with that in mind, I want to thank everyone for your incredible attention yesterday and today, for reviewing the documents that we suggested in between days, for coming with questions, reaching out, sending your friends, sending your friends in the future. So as a sort of open question to the group, and this is also a question for those of you who may have been hanging out in other tracks as well. What are, outside of our Slack channel and our shared documents that we've created thus far, are there any other requests for ongoing engagement? If I set a follow-up conversation to review a bit more of the work that we've done here in a more refined form, would people show up? General question, maybe some of you.
I got enough gas left in the tank for about 5 o'clock, and then I'm going to turn into a puddle.
Oh, no, sorry, not today. Like next week. Okay. Like, once we've all had a little bit of time to sit with this information, we can contribute to it asynchronously, and then we can reconvene to discuss, how we're going to move forward, how we want to put fingers to keys. So I promise I will not put anything more on your calendar for today. Everyone has been an absolute rock star. And although I do appreciate anyone who's thinking about a yes there. But I think we've certainly met all of the success. So just to remind everybody, the success criteria that we set forth at the very beginning of this conversation yesterday was, are we going to be able to identify folks who have opinions and thoughts about our work in this space? Are we going to be able to refine our questions enough to think of, a solution that we could build together, or what that V0 could look like that we want to get together pretty urgently? And 3, are we going to be able to evolve the conversation to a point where we could even think about making a hackathon prompt? I feel pretty comfortable that we have met all of those success criteria extremely well. So round of applause for everybody here today. Thank you so much for sticking through and helping us to honor those commitments. As I mentioned, we'll take an aggregation of all of the thoughts and contributions, probably rewatching some of this footage because I couldn't quite annotate everything as we went along. And we will take the output of this work. So that's going to be some more notes around the proposed solution, more refined suggestions of these hackathon prompts to be submitted in that /baseline repo. And then we'll also send out some notes around reconvening. But of course, I'm available. We are all available 24/7, 365 on the Baseline Slack. Should anyone have ideas or suggestions for how we might amend this roadmap moving forward. But I would suggest that everybody take a little breather from the phone book for maybe a day. Think about all of the ideas that we've pushed around here. Certainly remember the call that you heard from John around products, services, and opportunities. We are building a new world, And that world is going to require a lot of onboarding, hand-holding, support to get enterprises up and running. And so the more rich of an ecosystem we can envision of products and services built around this, the more we will be able to anticipate some of those enterprise needs and maybe even remove some of the enterprise adoption blockers early on. So even though our focus is not in product development right now, it should be perpetually top of mind because as I think it was Mark noted earlier, we have to think about not only what we're saying, but also about how we're being heard. And that means how we're introducing ourselves to these enterprises, not only the code that we're putting forth, but the opportunities, use cases, and potential that we're presenting as well. So I have chatted quite enough for 2 days. Thank you all for your incredible patience listening to my voice and to all of these esoteric details, but I hope all of you are just as excited as I am for the outstanding work to be done here. And we certainly also have quite a bit of homework for the standards team as well. So Anais, we are coming for you. If you're listening to this later on, we've got some reference documentation that we're really excited to team up for. So any last questions, suggestions, things you're scared of, anything you need help with? Great work, everybody. Thank you again so much.